The Dead and the Dying, Act 2, written by Leon Hamilton, featuring voice talent from Olivia Steele, Jeff Sturdivant, Steve Taylor, Jesse Cornett, Eric Peabody, Paul J. McSorley, Beatles Fanise, Creepyface, Chillers and Thrillers, Silver's Scary Stories, Paunch Monster Studios, and Duchess of Darkness. Chapter 1. Saved. Sitting up, gasping for air, Beth rubbed her eyes, trying to clear the fog from her brain. There were bandages around her midsection, and her head was throbbing from a beast of a headache. She was in bed and had no idea where she was or how she'd gotten there. The last thing she remembered was driving through the intersection with Andrew riding next to her.
Drew? Where are you? Drew!
Wincing from the pain in her ribs, she threw the blanket off, then tried to get up. Legs wobbling underneath her, she struggled her way to the door, trying to ignore the pain from each step. She'd made it halfway across the room when the door swung open as Andrew entered, followed by an old man wearing a gray suit. Rushing to her side, Andrew helped his mother back to the bed, then hugged her and smiled as he pulled away.
I didn't think you were gonna wake up. Are you okay?
Seeing him instantly calmed her down. Letting out a sigh of relief, she nodded and then reached up to touch him on the cheek.
I'm a lot better now that I know you're okay. Where are we?
I think it's a church. The lady that saved us brought us here. This is Mr. McGilroy. He says we can stay as long as we want.
When she finally took a look at the man, Beth almost smirked. He looked like a real-life version of Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. The only difference was Gilroy didn't have the hunched back and bad posture. Giving him a friendly smile, Beth relaxed a little.
Thank you for helping us. I don't know what we would have done without you.
Gilroy nodded and spoke up.
No need for thanks, my dear. This is the Lord's work we do here. What man of faith would deny salvation to those in need?
Something about him seemed wrong. There was a glimmer in his eyes that gave her a bad feeling. Maintaining her friendly smile, Beth thanked the man again, then asked if she could have a moment alone with Andrew. Once Gilroy was gone and the door was closed, she brought her finger up to her lips, signaling Andrew to stay quiet. The two of them sat listening to the old man's footsteps get further away. When they couldn't hear him anymore, Beth spoke in a hushed tone.
Are you okay?
Andrew nodded, and she continued.
Good. How'd we get here?
A lady in a blue truck saw me trying to get you out of the car, so she stopped to help. She was on her way here, so she brought us with her. I don't know her name, but she's in the main hall with the others.
Others? How many?
I don't know, but there's a lot of them. A couple came in last night, but I don't think anyone else is going to be able to get in.
Why? What happened? Wait, what do you mean last night? How long have we been here?
We got here a few days ago. I haven't been keeping up. No one else can get in because a car drove by with a bunch of zombies following it. When they couldn't keep up, they just sort of stopped. Now there's like 100 of them around the building.
Looking around the room, Beth tried to focus. They needed to get out of the city, but now that they didn't have a car, that was going to be tough. Before she could say anything about it, Andrew spoke up.
I think that Gilroy guy is watching me. Last night I couldn't sleep, so I went to the main hall. When I got ready to come back to the room, I saw him. He was standing on one of the balconies looking at me. I was tweaking for a second. I had to do a double take, but when I looked again, he was gone.
Why would he be watching you?
I don't know. I didn't do anything. I wasn't even here that long. Everyone was crying and freaking out, so I came back here.
Wincing and getting back to her feet, Beth made her way over to the window to look outside. They were on the second floor. A massive stone tower blocked most of the view, but glancing down to her left, the street was visible. Across the road, abandoned cars surrounded the gas station on the corner. The dead were everywhere, some shuffling, others crawling, but the ones that scared her the most were the runners. They were fast, strong, and vicious as hell. They'd seen more than a few attacks before the accident. The runners led the slow ones to the food, but now that there was none, they were attacking the crawlers. Beth watched as 3 runners piled on a morbidly obese crawler that had been lagging behind. They devoured him, leaving nothing but bones. Disgusted, Beth turned her attention back to Andrew.
I don't like it any more than you do, but we're stuck here. Even if those things weren't outside, we don't have a car.
Trailing off, Beth turned and looked out the window. There were at least 24 cars on the street, not to mention the 8 still parked at the pumps. Nodding to herself, she winced, then turned and limped over to the bed.
Go to the window and look at the gas station across the street.
Doing as he was told, Andrew took a look, then turned to his mother and shrugged. Taking a deep breath, Beth got silent for a second, choosing her next words wisely.
If I can get one of those cars, we could get back on the road. The problem is I'm hurt. If we go out there right now, I won't make it. We need to stay here long enough for me to heal. Once I'm back on my feet, we can go.
Nodding his head, Andrew agreed, then went wide-eyed as an idea struck him.
We still have our stuff. You could call Uncle Pat and ask him to come get us.
Instantly rejecting the plan, Beth shook her head.
He's got a family of his own to look after. We can't ask him to leave them. We're on our own here. Just give it a couple of days. If I'm not ready by then, we'll come up with something else. Till then, do what you can to avoid the old man and stay out of trouble.
Their conversation didn't go on much longer. After helping his mother into bed, Andrew left the room. His plan was to get her something to eat from the kitchen. A few of the people from the church had been giving out sandwiches, but most of the people in the chapel weren't eating, so he figured there'd be a lot left over. When he got to the main hall, he stopped just outside the doorway. It was a large circular room with balconies going all the way around on the second floor. The main floor was lined with long wooden benches divided into sections surrounding a stage, and on that stage stood Mr. Gilroy. He was telling everyone about the evacuation site being overrun by the dead. After calming the crowd, he launched into a rant about sin and evil deeds being the cause of all this. Using scriptures to reinforce his point, he finished his speech by saying,
"The meek shall inherit the earth, and we who have gathered here are the chosen few. Rejoice, brothers and sisters, for now is the time of new beginnings. Make no mistake, the road ahead will not be a kind one. There will be hard days and even harder choices, but together we shall overcome this obstacle. For now, eat and rest. All of you are welcome to stay. If there's anything you need, feel free to ask. Have a wonderful evening and bless you all. Good night."
With that, he ended his speech and exited the stage. Andrew watched the old man cross the room and stop to talk to a young couple standing near the kitchen. The conversation didn't last long. Gilroy motioned for the pair to follow him, and the 3 of them disappeared down a nearby hall. Once Andrew was sure the old man was gone, he hurried over to the tables where the food was set. It was the same as the night before: peanut butter sandwiches, an apple, and a bottle of water. As he gathered what he came for, the murmuring from the crowd became clear. Gilroy's speech had received a mixed response. While a lot of the crowd seemed to be on board, some of them were put off by the whole thing and were talking about leaving. Moving a little slower than necessary, Andrew overheard some guy in a trucker hat talking about a hunting lodge in Alaska. He said the cold would keep the dead away. Judging by the reaction from the people around him, they believed it. Nodding to himself, Andrew grabbed sandwiches and 2 bottles of water, then headed back to the room. When he got to the hall, he stopped and turned back. Looking around at everyone, he realized he didn't see the lady who had helped them after the wreck. He'd seen her the night before, arguing with one of the ladies that had been passing out the blankets. Shrugging it off, thinking she'd probably taken off on her own, he got back on track and took the food to his mother. Chapter 2. Homework. An ocean of the dead milled the streets as Jerry sat staring out the window. After witnessing the fall of the quick-stand evacuation site, he found himself trapped, with nowhere to go and no way to get there. He'd taken cover in a nearby apartment complex, less than a block from Ground Zero. On the upside, there was plenty of food in the apartment he'd picked, and there were 8 others that were empty. The set of units were the only ones in the complex with a lobby. Locking those doors had saved his life. Now, he was sitting in his own little compound. On the downside, there were zombies everywhere. In the first few hours, some of the horde spread out, disappearing into the neighborhood. The ones that couldn't follow the runners were now filling the streets, attacking anything living or being drawn away by distant noises. Taking his attention away from the window for the first time in hours, Jerry blinked and rubbed his eyes, then got up.
Oh, start early,
he muttered to himself as he stretched while looking around the apartment. He remembered reading somewhere that it was best to get a jump on things in a disaster situation. Waiting for your supplies to run out was a good way to make bad decisions. After taking an inventory of what he had, it was time to clean out the other apartments. Stepping out onto the shared walkway, Jerry quietly went over to the railing and took a look at the lobby entrance. The entire wall was made of glass, but it was mirror tinted, so he could see out, but no one could see in. He watched a pair of zombies shamble by on the sidewalk. When they turned and came towards the door, he almost panicked. For a second, he thought they'd seen him, but when they stopped and stared at their reflections, he relaxed. They stood there till a small group of people ran by, then they staggered off in hot pursuit. Confident he could pull this off without being seen, Jerry got to work. The first apartment smelled like cat piss and looked like it belonged to a hoarder. There were boxes stacked floor to ceiling, cluttering up most of the place. But when he got to the kitchen, it was worth it. Oddly enough, the kitchen looked like someone with OCD cleaned it. Everything was spotless and neatly arranged. The contrast between this room and the rest of the apartment was surreal. The pantry was stocked with canned food and dry goods like rice, beans, instant potatoes, noodles, and oats, all kept in labeled glass jars. Rather than attempt to move everything, Jerry loaded a box with the things he wanted, then made a list of what was there. Once he'd inventoried everything and dropped the first box off at his apartment, he moved on to the next. By the time he'd finished the second floor, he'd found more than enough food and water, but most importantly, a baseball bat. At first glance, it appeared to be a normal bat, but when he grabbed it, he was surprised. The thing felt like it weighed 20 pounds. After swinging it a few times, it was obvious he'd need practice using it. Putting the bat aside for the moment, he set his sights on the first floor. The first apartment near the bottom of the stairs was vacant and looked like it had been empty for a while. As he stepped out into the lobby, he flinched. One of the dead was standing just outside the window next to him. If it weren't for the glass, he'd be lunch. Sneering at the thought, Jerry stood silently watching the thing outside. It was a woman. She would have been pretty if the right side of her face hadn't been chewed off. As a matter of fact, the entire right side of her body had been shredded. Trying not to make any sudden moves, Jerry glanced over his shoulder at the street. More were coming. So far, all of them would stare at their reflection for a while, then leave, but he didn't want to risk it. Slowly turning and going back upstairs, he decided to save the first floor for later, when the coast was clear. The rest of the day was spent watching news reports and Googling information he thought he might need. Using a desktop computer and a printer he'd found in one of the apartments, he printed out how-to guides. Gardening, auto repair, water distillation, and anything else he thought might be useful was printed, stapled, and organized. When that was done, he used the last of the printer's ink to make maps of all the hardest hit areas. Every major city had been hit. The only areas with minimal exposure were small towns and mountain ranges. Staying in the city would be a nightmare on a good day, but for now, it would have to do. The streets were too active. Trying to leave right now would be a death sentence. In the end, his only choice was to stay put long enough for things to die down. Accepting the fact that this would be home for a while, he put everything away, then went back to the window. He watched the dead. Learning how they moved and interacted with each other felt important. The freshly turned moved fast. When they ran off, huge chunks of the horde would follow them. He couldn't tell if it was by design or if it was just their reaction to movement. The ones that were left behind broke down into a couple different categories. The slow, stupid ones that would aimlessly wander around looking for a meal. They weren't harmless, but they were pretty easy to avoid. Then there were some that weren't as fast as the runners, but they could move well enough to be a problem. There were always one or two bigger ones that acted as alphas leading the others. Lastly, there were the ones that had been so badly mangled that they couldn't walk or were just too slow to keep up. They would hide and wait for victims. Once a meal was close enough to grab, they'd snap into action. The one thing they all had in common was the fact that they didn't make noises unless food was near. It was unnerving to see them silently moving through the streets. Jerry could imagine turning a corner and suddenly finding himself facing a wall of the dead. On the upside, one thing that always gave them away was their smell. The stench of 1,000 people voiding their bowels was indescribable. That aroma would get worse as the body started to rot. A combination would be like an invisible punch to the face. Wincing at the thought of it, Jerry continued watching till the sun started to set. All he could see were stragglers, but there was no way the buildings were empty. The evacuation site had been set up at a local high school. The campus was massive and had been packed with military personnel. He figured if there were any survivors, they'd be in there. If no one made it, those buildings would be full of the dead. Either way, he wasn't going inside to check. Over the next few days, he fell into a routine. Every morning, he'd wake up, eat breakfast, then practice swinging the bat for an hour. After that, he'd shower, then use the internet to plan his escape routes out of the city. There was no point in checking the news. Every station was broadcasting the same set of instructions on a loop. The rest of the channels were either off air or recycling old programming. Time was ticking. It was just a matter of days before the lights went out. If he was going to stay, he needed to find a way to secure the building. There were only 2 main entrances, but the first-floor apartments had patio doors and windows he'd have to cover. Rather than risk exposing himself or making too much noise, he came up with a solution. Going door to door, he reversed all the locks and filled the keyholes with superglue. He was almost done when he ran into a problem. The last apartment was locked. He noticed it when he first checked the building. At the time, it wasn't an issue, but now that he was staying, he needed to know what was in there. Pressing his ear to the door and lightly knocking, Jerry listened intently. For the first few seconds, all he could hear was the slight hum of the air conditioner. Feeling certain there was no one inside, he stepped back to inspect the door. Getting it open without making noise was going to be a problem. As that thought crossed his mind, a shadow blocked out the light coming through the peephole. Realizing there was someone in there, Jerry stepped aside just in case they decided to shoot through the door. Staying calm and keeping his voice down, he introduced himself.
I don't want any trouble. My name's Jerry.
After a few seconds with no reply, he continued.
I don't know if you've noticed, but there's some serious shit going on outside. It's probably best to stay away from the windows and try not to make any noise. If you need anything, I'm upstairs in apartment 4.
Once again, there was no response, but rather than stick around, Jerry went on with his day. The plan was to collect the sandbags from barricades the military had set up. He'd go out and make sure the coast was clear, then start bringing them in 1 or 2 at a time. When it was done, the lobby would be locked down, and the only exit would be the rear door leading to the parking lot. With the game plan set, he rushed off to get ready. Putting on his armor felt strange. For a second, he imagined this is what it must have felt like to go to war. Strapping on his gun belt and grabbing the bat, he headed out. Stepping through those doors for the first time in days was a shock to the system. There were abandoned cars blocking the street and bodies everywhere. Most of the corpses had been too destroyed to reanimate. All that was left were piles of maggot-infested meat. The cars, on the other hand, were a completely different story. While a lot of them were empty, a good number of them contained zombies. They groaned and mashed their faces against the window as Jerry crept by, trying to stay quiet. After watching the dead for days, he thought he'd prepared himself for this, but a tan Ford Explorer proved him wrong. In the back seat, there were 2 dehydrated infants, still strapped in their carriers, that stopped him in his tracks. As if seeing them wasn't bad enough, the sound they made was haunting. Their cries were almost normal. If he wasn't looking at their pale little faces, he would have thought they were alive. Lost in the moment, he didn't notice the sound of shuffling feet approaching. It wasn't till a stooped-over corpse stepped around the front of the SUV that he snapped out of it. Jerry had been carrying the bat in his hand. All he had to do was change his stance, grip it, then let it rip. He'd practiced for this exact moment, and now that it was here, he felt like he was going to shit a brick. The guy in front of him was slow, missing his left arm and dragging a broken right leg that gave him an awkward shuffle. Locked in on his target, Jerry was about to swing when a mangled hand reached out from under the car and grabbed his ankle. Now faced with 2 enemies, he had to think fast. Snatching his leg free and repositioning himself, Jerry watched the zombie staggering toward him. For some reason, he couldn't stop looking at the stump of his left arm. It had been broken off at the elbow, and the nub had been chewed down to the bone. forcing himself to focus on his target. Jerry loaded up and swung away. His form was flawless. He practiced it every day. Powering through with his hips, he let it rip, and the result was devastation. The shot hit the zombie's head with so much force that one of its eyes popped and the other exploded in its socket. The impact also cracked its skull at an odd angle, causing some brain to mushroom out of the new opening as it fell. With no time to admire his work, Jerry set his sights on the second zombie. This one was in bad shape. If it weren't for the tattered remains of a dress, he wouldn't have known it was a woman. Her legs were missing, and her arms were a gnarled mess, but that wasn't stopping her. Looking at the trail of blood and skin she was leaving, Jerry let her crawl till she touched his boots. Sidestepping, then kicking her hard enough to flip her onto her back, Jerry sneered at the undead thing. She squirmed and groaned, trying to right herself, while he stared down at her. After an odd moment of silence, he looked around, making sure no more were coming. Seeing that the area was clear, he glared at her one last time, then caved her skull in with the bat and walked away. Chapter 3: Swimming Lessons. The trip to the harbor hadn't gone exactly as planned. Aside from having to navigate around abandoned cars and packs of zombies, Daniel picked up 2 passengers, a woman named Virginia and a little girl named Holly that had been held up in a car for 2 days when he found them. At first glance, he thought they were mother and daughter, or possibly sisters. But it turns out they didn't know each other. Virginia had been running through the traffic, trying to escape a horde that had flooded the area. She jumped in the first car with an unlocked door, and that's how they wound up together. Whoever Holly had been with never came back to the car, so Virginia took it upon herself to look after the girl. What was supposed to be an hour's drive took an entire day. After weaving their way through roadblocks and taking detours, they wound up in the City Hall building. The harbor was less than a block away, and the place had been secured by a small group of people. There were 5 survivors held up in the building: Marvin, Bruce, Zoe, Jill, and Pete. Marvin and Zoe both worked in the building as file clerks and were there when everything started. Bruce and Jill came from the surrounding neighborhood after escaping their homes. And last but not least, there was Pete. He'd come to the harbor with 2 of his buddies to steal a boat, but when they got there, all of them were gone. They wound up getting trapped by a pack of zombies. One of them, a guy called Slim, got bit and turned on the first night. Slim killed Rico, the other member of their group, and he escaped out of the bathroom window. From there, he made his way to the City Hall building and had been there ever since. No one seemed to be in charge. As a matter of fact, most of them were planning on leaving. The only reason they were there was because they didn't have a ride. When Daniel offered up his car, all hell broke loose. Bruce didn't trust Marvin. Jill didn't like Bruce, and Zoe didn't want to leave. Pete, on the other hand, wasn't involved. He sat off to the side, smoking a cigarette and watching them argue. When Virginia and Holly left to find the restrooms, Daniel rolled over to Pete and gave him a nod.
What's going on in here? Why are they acting like that?
Pete chuckled.
They're fucked up. This shit's got them all twisted. The chick with the glasses swears she caught the creep with the comb over watching her get dressed. She says he was beating his meat and staring at her from around the corner.
He paused, laughing to himself and taking another drag before going on.
Marvin over there's been acting weirder than usual. He's been sneaking off and coming back late at night. Bruce thinks he's planning something. I figure he's looking for a way out, but you never know. He seems like the disgruntled employee type to me. The old lady doesn't want to leave because she's scared shitless. Hell, we all are, but she'd rather starve to death in here than get eaten out there.
Taking it all in, Daniel nodded to himself, then asked,
What about you?
After one last drag of a cigarette, Pete thumped the butt away and exhaled the smoke.
Oh, don't you worry about me. My brothers know where I'm at. As soon as they get here, I'm riding out. And what about you and that prime cut you walked in with? You two planning on setting up shop and playing house?
Shaking his head and looking around, Daniel shrugged.
Not really. I'm supposed to be meeting someone here, but it might take a while.
Pete flashed a quick smirk and raised an eyebrow.
I noticed you said I and not we. I take that to mean the girls ain't part of the plan. Who are they to you?
The look in his eye was an instant red flag. Without flinching, Daniel replied,
I haven't told them about it. I didn't want to get their hopes up. If things don't work out, I don't want them to give up if we have to keep moving.
Giving an approving nod, Pete got up from his seat and stretched.
Smart move. If you're planning on being here a while, you might want to start thinking about food. I wasn't joking when I said starve in here. There's nothing to eat. That's the real reason they want to get out of here.
With that, he patted Daniel on the shoulder and walked away as Virginia and Holly came walking over. Glancing at the group, then back to Daniel, Virginia shook her head.
What happened? Why are they arguing?
After explaining the situation, Daniel pulled her aside.
Here's the deal. I'm supposed to be meeting someone at the harbor in a couple of weeks, and there's no food here. The supplies I have might last a week or two, but after that...
Before he could finish talking, the lights went out, plunging the city into darkness. Everyone stopped talking as the sound of a dying city crept in. The crackle of distant gunfire bounced off the walls, highlighting another sound that had gone unnoticed. At first, it was hard to make out. A dull thudding slowly became audible as someone in the group clicked on a flashlight.
Does anyone else hear that?
Bruce called out.
On it!
Pete replied, using the flashlight on his phone to guide the way. He wasn't gone long.
We're fucked. There's a bunch of those things pressed up against the doors.
Then Zoe blurted out.
It's their fault. Those things followed them here. We never should have let them in. They should have to go out there and deal with it.
In that instant, all eyes were on Daniel, Virginia, and Holly. Stepping up and pointing at Zoe, Virginia replied,
Eat shit, you old bitch. We didn't ask to be taken in. You invited us.
That outburst kicked off a war of words that went in circles till Jill finally made the point that none of it mattered. Blaming each other wasn't going to change the fact that there were zombies at the door. When everything died down, the group managed to come up with a plan. Going out there guns blazing would do more harm than good. The noise would attract more zombies, and they probably wouldn't kill enough of them to make a difference. That only left them with two options: abandon the place or lead the zombies away. Since abandoning the place would probably lead to most of them dying, they chose the only option they had left. Leading zombies away would be tricky. They'd have to find a way to trap them or get rid of them for good. Bruce suggested leading them to the pier. He thought if they could get the zombies into the water, they would either sink or float away. It wasn't a bad idea, and when Jill mentioned the house near the building had boat ramps, it got better. From the back of the building, the ramps were so close they could see into the water. The only thing standing in the way was a chain-link fence. Marvin solved that problem with a pair of bolt cutters from the janitor's office. With all pieces in play, it was time to pick roles. Since Zoe blamed Daniel, Virginia, and Holly for the problem, Daniel and Virginia would be the bait. They'd run around the side of the building and come up behind the zombies. They had to make enough noise to get their attention, then lead them to the trap. Marvin and Jill would cut the gate and be back in the building before Daniel and Virginia got there. When they made it to the hole, all they had to do was dive into the water and make noise till the zombies started falling in. Once the dead hit the water, Daniel and Virginia would swim to the closest ramp and get out. From there, they would have to go around 1 or 2 houses to get back to the building. Pete and Bruce would be taking out the stragglers, while Zoe kept an eye on Holly. On paper, it seemed like a solid plan. Now, it was time to see if it actually worked. Daniel and Virginia stood by the rear exit, nervously watching Marvin and Jill make their way to the fence. There were no zombies on this side of the building, so getting there was easy. When Marv started cutting the fence, the sound made everyone pause. Once they were sure they hadn't been spotted, Jill held the fence to stop it from rattling, and Marvin got back to cutting. Since Jill couldn't be the lookout anymore, Daniel and Virginia took up the slack and stepped out. Heart racing, hands shaking, Daniel glanced over at Virginia.
Do you think this is gonna work?
Turning to look at him, she flashed a nervous smile.
Not really. But if we're gonna die, we might as well go for a swim first.
As scared as he was, Daniel managed to chuckle, then looked back to see Marvin making the last cut. When they were done, the opening was ready. Virginia nodded at him, then they headed to the front of the building. The walk up the driveway felt like it was taking too long. When they had made the plan, they hadn't thought about the actual distance they'd have to run. Looking back at the hole in the fence, Daniel frowned. This wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. A lot could go wrong. One misstep, and they could both be lunch. Trying not to think about it, he got focused. When they reached the end of the driveway and turned, both of them froze. The dead were everywhere. The noise from the ones pounding on the doors was drawing in more from the neighborhood. Silently watching for a moment and pulling the revolver from his coat pocket, Daniel asked,
Are you ready?
Wide-eyed, staring at the crowd, Virginia absently replied.
No.
Raising the gun in the air, aiming at the sky, Daniel muttered,
Me neither.
Then fired a shot. The reaction was instant. Every dead-eyed freak on the street turned and headed their way. The bulk of the horde was slow, but there were a few runners cutting through the crowd. Making a break for it, Daniel and Virginia darted down the driveway, focused on the fence. For a brief moment, the world around them melted away with the rhythm of their footsteps. There was no horde, no chaos. There was just that moment and Daniel. For the first time in days, it almost felt normal. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. The raspy breathing of the zombies on their tails snapped them back to reality. The hole was just a few feet away now. They were cutting through the grass and airborne in no time. In that second between flying and falling, everything slowed down. But when they hit the water, the world went into overdrive. One of the zombies had been closer than they'd realized. When they went into the water, it had nearly come down on top of them. Virginia resurfaced first and was far enough away that she'd been out of its reach. Daniel, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. As he breached the surface, the dead thing grabbed him, pulling him back under. He flailed his arms and kicked his legs, fighting to break the ghoul's grasp, but it wouldn't let go. It clawed at his back, gripping fistfuls of Daniel's jacket, pulling him down as it sank. When Virginia turned to look back, she froze. Daniel wasn't there, and the dead were falling in. Taking a deep breath and going under, she tried to spot him. The commotion was stirring up the sediment and clouding the water, but she caught a glimpse of him struggling with one of the dead. Pushing off as hard as she could, Virginia swam down, praying she didn't run out of air. She wasn't the best swimmer, but she knew enough not to drown. As she got closer, she saw the problem. The zombie had Daniel by the hood of his hoodie, and he couldn't get free. The moment she was close enough to touch him, she grabbed the only thing available, his ankle. Because the zombie grabbed him by the hood, Daniel found himself upside down, fighting for his life. There was no cathartic moment of acceptance. He didn't want to die, and he was going to do everything in his power to prove it. Pulling with everything he had left, Daniel tugged his shoulder free, but as he attempted to right himself, he felt hands gripping his ankle. In the heat of the moment, his reaction was to kick as hard as he could. He felt his heel connect with something solid, and the hands let go. He was free. Swimming as hard as he could, Daniel streaked towards the surface and broke through, gasping for air. Chapter 4. Division. The lights were out, the food was almost gone, and Beth still hadn't recovered. Andrew had taken to a small group of friends round his age. In the 2 weeks since they arrived, 6 of them had been caught trying to sneak out of the building more than once. Even though Beth didn't like the thought of Andrew being out there on his own, their failure gave her an idea. Since the lights went out, everyone gathered in the main hall during the day. The skylights made it perfect. From her spot near the main hall, Beth watched a group of concerned adults surrounding Gilroy. Glancing over at Andrew and his friends, she smirked, then winced and got up from her seat. Making her way over to the group around the old man, she slipped in and waited for her moment. As usual, the argument was about resources. Gilroy and his people had been rationing food, and it wasn't enough. The conversation bounced back and forward for a while till Gilroy asked if anyone had a solution. Then Beth stepped in.
Look around. This place is great, but with no food or water, we're just waiting for things to go bad. Now that the lights are off, any survivors out there are gonna be taking everything in sight. If we don't act now, there won't be anything left.
Seeing the crowd's attention shift, Gilroy almost sneered at her suggestion, but managed to smile and replied,
What exactly do you propose we do?
There's a gas station across the street packed with supplies. A small group could clean it out. There's enough food and water in there to last for a while. After that, we'll have to come up with something else.
Murmurs rolled through the crowd as people talked amongst themselves. Then someone shouted, What about those things out there? Heads turned and eyes focused on Beth. She expected the question. For the last 3 days, she'd watched the street, making note of every zombie in the area. Wincing as she replied,
All the fast ones are gone. There's a few trapped in cars and the rest are slow enough to avoid.
Realizing he was losing the crowd, Gilroy got back in the conversation.
Be careful, brothers and sisters. It's a slippery slope. If we commit to this today, what will we be tomorrow? Where will the line be drawn?
An elderly man wearing a ball cap called out,
I draw the line at your bullshit. We're gonna starve to death waiting on you.
For the first time since the conversation, Gilroy's smile dropped, and he scowled at the comment.
I understand your concerns, but is it necessary to risk lives over a short-term solution? While I may not condone stealing, I know we need food. Surely, there has to be a better way.
Another round of murmurs rolled through the crowd, while Beth took a moment to choose her words.
He's right. Even if we clean out the gas station, the supplies won't last long. To get what we need, some of us are going to have to go out there and get it. By a show of hands, how many people in this room are ready to do that?
Beth paused, looking around at the crowd. Only 3 adults raised their hands, but Andrew and his little crew were all in. Taking a quick count, she nodded and smirked.
The gas station may not be long-term, but if people are going out there, they need to be ready. Consider it practice. Call it training. Do whatever you gotta do to get it in your heads. This has to happen.
Raising his hands, attempting to calm the crowd, Gilroy chimed in.
Let's not jump to a decision. Take a night and think it over. In the morning, if you still want to go forward with this, my people will assist you.
The chattering died down, and the crowd seemed satisfied, but Beth couldn't help but notice how Gilroy was watching everyone. When he caught her looking at him, he gave a subtle nod and turned and walked away. Exhausted and feeling the pain from her bruised ribs, Beth took a seat and waved Andrew over. Making his way through the crowd, he walked up with a big smile on his face.
Are you really gonna let me go out there?
When she nodded her head, he tried to stay calm, but his excitement was shining through. Seeing how anxious he was, Beth told him to calm down, then had him help her back to their room. When they got there, the 2 of them sat by the window, and she told him what she needed him to do.
When you get to the gas station, check the cars at the pumps. Find ones with keys and a good amount of gas.
Andrew interrupted.
What about the others? Won't they be mad that I'm not helping?
Maybe. Tell them you're doing it so you can carry more supplies. Load the car and bring it over here to the parking lot. That's gonna be our ride when we leave, so pick a good one if you can.
Frowning, Andrew glanced out the window, then back at his mom.
I know we're supposed to be going to Uncle Pat's house, but I'm kind of starting to like it here. Besides, you can barely walk. What happens if we get into trouble on the road?
Thinking about it for a second, Beth looked at him and smiled. She couldn't help but see Roy every time she looked at him.
I'm gonna be off my feet for another couple of weeks. If you still want to stay once I'm better, we can talk about it then. For now, just do what I'm asking and get the car.
Okay, but what if the others decide not to do it?
If that happens, we're gonna have to do it ourselves. Just because they choose to starve doesn't mean we have to.
With a concerned nod, Andrew looked out the window again and spotted a zombie. A man dressed in a suit and tie aimlessly walked down the center of the road. His arms hung limply at his sides as he shuffled through the street, searching for a meal. For a second, Andrew wondered what it was like. Did they still have thoughts, or were they just husks? Empty, dumb things that ate till they rotted away. Shaking his head and getting back into the conversation, he looked at his mother.
I'm gonna go talk to the guys. They're ready, but some of the parents might not let them go.
With their plans in motion, he helped his mother to the bed, then left her to get some rest. When he got to the hall, Barbara was standing at the far end, talking with someone. She was one of Gilroy's people. Andrew and his friends had nicknamed her Mouse, due to her small stature and slim build. The truth was, there was something disturbing about the girl. Her pale skin, red hair, and bright green eyes gave her an almost ghostly appearance. In a way, she was worse than Mr. Gilroy. The old man was creepy, but Andrew didn't see him that often. Mouse, on the other hand, was always around. She would slip through the crowds and stay out of the way, rarely speaking to anyone. If you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't know she was there. The person she was talking to was Charlie. He was the old guy who told Mr. Gilroy he drew the line at his bullshit. Thinking back on that moment, Andrew smirked, then headed off to find his friends. It didn't take long to find Omar and Chuck. They were on the roof as usual. Omar and his family were one of the first groups to arrive at the church. They'd been evacuating with a larger group on a bus, but someone on board was infected. After the bus crashed, Omar and his family were able to escape, but no one else did. When they found another group going to the shrine, they joined them and have been there ever since. Chuck had come in alone. On the first night of the outbreak, his Aunt Anna, his mother's sister, came over after a fight with her husband. The next night, she sat in a warm bath and slit her wrists. When they found her, she had turned. She killed his mother, and his father got bit during the struggle. Chuck and his dad got away, but his father didn't make it to the next morning. From there, Chuck bounced from place to place till he looked up and found the church. After a quick conversation, the two of them promised they'd help no matter what the others decided. Satisfied with their answers, Andrew moved on to the next person on his list, which was Robert. At 18, Robert was the oldest of the group. He arrived at the church in a stolen ambulance with his grandparents. They were at the hospital when the outbreak started. Robert had been going through chemotherapy and was there for a checkup. When the zombie started attacking, a few of the nurses gathered patients and hid in one of the maintenance rooms. After 3 days with no food, they tried to escape. 7 of them made it to the lobby, but only 4 made it out of the building. The nurse they escaped with helped them find an ambulance, then went off on her own. She told them about the shrine. Originally, they weren't going to go, but when they couldn't get home, they came here. If anyone had a reason to not go, it was Robert. But as always, he wanted in. The problem was with his grandparents. They weren't happy about his decision, and they were letting it be known. Mike was in, but Priscilla wouldn't be able to help. Since they'd been caught making out, her parents refused to let them be alone together. Add that to the fact that they didn't want her risking her life for food, it became a pointless argument. Both of their families had already been at the church when everything started, so they didn't have any experience with what was happening outside. Saving the best for last, Andrew went to find Jessica. Since the day he met her, he'd been more than a little obsessed with her. In truth, she was the reason he wanted to stay. She arrived there alone, covered in blood and starving. No one knew where she came from or what happened to her out there. Whatever it was, she wouldn't talk about it, and Andrew related to that. He knew exactly where to find her. She had set up camp in the library. If she wasn't with the others, that's where she'd be. Excited by the thought of talking to her, he hurried through the building. When he got to the door, he paused to gather himself, then walked in. Their conversation lasted a lot longer than it should have. He was just supposed to be double-checking, but they wound up talking for close to an hour. When he finally got back to tell his mother everything, she was asleep. The medicine that Mr. Gilroy's people were giving her kept her that way most of the time. Because of that, she only took it when the pain was too much for her to handle. For a second, Andrew thought it was odd. She seemed okay when he left. Brushing it off, he left her to get some rest, then went to hang out with Omar and Chuck. The day passed with no problems. By nightfall, it was clear. Almost everyone in the church was on board. The next morning, when everyone gathered in the main hall, the meeting took less than 5 minutes. Clearly agitated with the group's decision, Gilroy put on a fake smile, then respectfully excused himself while everyone got ready. The plan was simple. 3 groups of 5 would take turns going to the store and coming back. When one group came in, the next would go out. They'd repeat this process till the store was empty. From the start, things went wrong. The first group, 3 women and 2 men, ran into trouble on the street. Zombies that appeared slow from a distance suddenly became reinvigorated by the smell of fresh meat. They snapped into action, crawling from under cars and stumbling out of doorways. In no time, the group found themselves fighting off a small horde. They took down a few of them before making a run for the store. When they got to the door, things got worse. Ghoulish faces pressed against the glass, trying to get out, while the pack from the street closed in. Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, Andrew's group rushed out to help. Their attack was wild and uncoordinated. They hacked and slashed, stomped and bashed their way through it, but they took the pack down. Unfortunately, they hadn't gotten there fast enough. 2 members of the first group had been bitten. Unintentionally taking control, Andrew looked at Chuck.
Get the ones that are hurt back to the church. There's enough of us here to get this done.
Nodding, Chuck motioned for the pair to follow him, then headed out. Turning back to the group, Andrew did a quick head count, then glanced inside the store.
There aren't that many. The 7 of us should be able to do this. You 2.
He paused to point out the man and woman from the first group.
Get the doors open and try not to let too many out at once. We'll team up, attack 2-on-1 every time. That way, if someone gets overpowered, they have backup. Keep it simple. Knock them down and bash their heads in. Shouldn't take very long. You guys ready?
After a hesitant round of shrugs and nods, everyone got into position. When the doors opened, things happened so fast, it was hard to keep up. The first pair of zombies fell exactly as planned. Andrew and Jessica went first. Their zombie was a bald guy wearing an orange sweatshirt and jogging pants. The dried blood on his face and chest almost looked like a beard as he staggered towards them. Jessica was using a heavy table leg as a club, and Andrew had his dad's buck knife. They rushed in together, with Jessica going low and Andrew acting as a distraction. She swung hard and hit one of the zombie's knees. There was a loud crack as the bone snapped, causing the dead man to fall over. Next, Andrew quickly moved in and drove his blade through the man's eye socket to seal the deal. More than a little proud of himself, he glanced over at Mike and Robert to see how they were doing. Their zombie looked like it had been through hell. Whatever it was, Mike and Rob went to work on it. They were both carrying machetes, and needless to say, neither of them knew what they were doing. Rather than sticking to the plan, they hacked away at it. They cut off its arms, but took turns trying to decapitate it with one swing. Frustrated with their antics, a lady from the first group stepped up with a hammer and bashed the zombie's skull in. All the action stirred up the zombies trapped in the store. They were surging against the doors, forcing their way out. The 2 people fighting to keep them shut didn't stand a chance. 2 things happened at the exact same time. The glass shattered, and the doors buckled as a wave of dead spilled out. It was chaos. The pair at the door went down screaming and caused a pileup. The zombies dropping to their knees, feasting on the fresh flesh, had blocked the entrance. There weren't many left inside, but they were having trouble getting out. The world around Andrew faded into the background as he stared into the rotten faces of the dead. He was aware of the people around him yelling and pulling at him, but they seemed far away. Something inside him clicked. Fear was gone, replaced by a soothing numbness that set his body on autopilot. Before anyone could stop him, he stormed over to the closest zombie, stabbed it in the head, and was going after another one. Seeing his attack motivated the others. Jessica, Mike, and Robert rushed in, and the 4 of them went to work. The last member of the first group watched from a distance. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. They were attacking everything in sight, till there was nothing left. When it was over, the 4 of them were breathing heavily and covered in blood. But Andrew was smiling. Chapter 5. It's Never Easy. As the sun set on another day, Jerry stood at the window staring out at the Quickstead evacuation site. He'd been scavenging it for supplies over the last couple of weeks, but since the lights went out, he'd been avoiding night runs. The dead weren't the only ones more active after dark. A gang had taken up residence somewhere close by. He'd been lucky enough to avoid them till now, but tonight, they were at Quickstead. There were 4 of them, a motley bunch consisting of 3 men and what looked like a young boy. The one walking point was tall and moved like he knew what he was doing. Out of the 4, he was the only one with an assault rifle. The others were carrying hunting rifles and shotguns. As far as weapons went, Jerry had come up on an arsenal. Raiding the evacuation site had provided him with enough guns and ammo to kill every living and non-living thing around for miles. The problem was food. While it wasn't an immediate issue, he'd been planning on moving a few pallets of MREs from one of the trucks to his building. If the group found the truck, the odds were they'd take it all, or worse, move in. Both scenarios left a bad taste in his mouth. While having living people around might be helpful, these guys looked like trouble. He watched as they sneaked their way through the abandoned cars while taking out zombies. They were smart enough not to use guns right away. They took down the dead with machetes and did their best to stay out of sight. At the rate they were going, they'd be crossing over the barricades soon. Jerry needed to make a decision. Either let them scavenge the place or try to scare them off. Of course, there was always the option of trying to talk to them. He could help them find a few things and steer them away from the trucks. That way, he might make some allies and possibly buy enough time to pack his compound with food. Thinking talking to them was the safest option, Jerry grabbed his gear and headed out. He'd made it a habit to stay suited up to save time. Tonight, he was in full armor with a hockey mask he'd found in the trunk of a car. He was carrying a tactical shotgun, a Glock 40, and as usual, the weighted training bat. Before leaving the building, he went downstairs to visit his only neighbor. Over the last few weeks, they still hadn't seen each other face to face, but they began communicating through the door. Her name was Cindy. She'd been living in the building with her boyfriend Garrett. According to her, Garrett worked on a commercial fishing rig and had been gone for 2 days before everything happened. She was waiting for him to come home. Deep down, Jerry knew the guy was either dead or never coming back, but he kept it to himself. After knocking, he waited for a response. As usual, it didn't take long.
Hey, Jerry. What's going on?
Hey, Sin. I was just letting you know there's some people headed for the evacuation site. I'm gonna try to talk to them.
There was a long silence before she responded.
Are you sure that's a good idea?
Not really, but there's a truckload of MREs over there. If they get to it first, they might not leave anything behind. I'm gonna try to steer them towards something else. There's a lot of good shit left over there. It shouldn't be hard.
What if they need the food? The other stuff might not stop them from searching the place. Or, what if they don't want to talk to you? What if they decide they want what you've got? I think you should leave them alone. If they find it, they find it. I'm sure there's more food out there.
One of those pallets could feed us for a year. I can't risk losing that. I'm going out there.
Suit yourself. Just be careful. Those people might be dangerous.
Jerry nodded, then tapped twice on the door and headed out. The taps were a signal they'd come up with to end a conversation. Usually he'd wait for her to tap back, but time was ticking, and he didn't know how far the group had gone. Once he was out of the building, he took the long way around. It would cost him a few minutes, but he didn't want to risk giving up the location of his hideout. As he crossed the parking lot behind his building, Gunshots echoed around him. It sounded like they'd come from the street. That group had probably ran into trouble. Picking up his pace, he turned right and ran down the sidewalk to the next building. After a quick sprint through a second parking lot, the street was in sight. From where he was standing, it was impossible to see what that group had gotten off to. If it weren't for the muzzle flashes and discharging rifles, he wouldn't have seen them. They crossed Lexington and were trekking through the field that separated the main road from the front of the school. The supply trucks were stationed on the football field at the rear of the campus. Judging by the small crowd of zombies moving towards the group, they weren't going to get far. Regretting not bringing his rifle with a scope, Jerry crossed the road, headed for the intake area that had been set up in the main field. Going this way, he'd be able to cut the group off if he could get there in time. The problem was, they were moving fast and had covered a lot more ground. They were already crossing the parking lot and headed for the front of the school. That building was packed with zombies. If they opened those doors, those things could flood the street for weeks. Ducking through a hole he'd cut in the fence a while back, Jerry hurried through intake until he caught sight of the group. It was too late. They'd reached the doors. Now all he could do was watch. The tallest of the group pulled a flare gun from his waistband and fired it into the air. After a few seconds, flares went up from 4 different areas. These guys were organized, and by the looks of it, they were making a move for the evacuation site. The 4 of them took up positions and took turns firing at the incoming zombies. When one had to reload, the other would open fire. They kept that rotation going till 4 more groups of guys on bicycles came riding in. Each group carried an extra bike. The new people quickly dispatched the remaining zombies when a member of the first group rigged something to the doors. Once they were all set, they scattered in different directions, all except one. The last man rode over to the flagpole and got off of his bike. He quickly took off his backpack, then pulled out an old-school boombox. He attached it to the rope from the flag, then turned it on, slapped in a CD, and cranked the volume. With that done, he hoisted the radio around 10 foot off the ground and tied off the rope. Hopping back on his bike, he pulled something from his coat pocket and held it up. There was a brief pause, then 2 small explosions blew the front doors of the school apart, and he rode away. When the smoke cleared and the debris settled, the dead came staggering out of the building. Jerry knew it was packed, but he underestimated the numbers. They poured out in the dozens, filling the walkways and spilling into the parking lot. There were too many to count. Things were bad and getting worse. The commotion attracted every zombie around. They were coming from everywhere. It was time to leave. Getting home wasn't going to be easy. The streets were filling fast. Since there was no reason to be quiet, Jerry cocked his shotgun, took a deep breath, and got moving. The second he passed through the hole in the fence, there was a problem. A rotting mass of muscles and teeth lumbered towards him. The guy looked like he'd been a bodybuilder. His muscles had muscles, but in the end, that didn't save him. The big guy was dragging something that gave him an odd shuffle. It took Jerry a second to realize what it was. The behemoth was handcuffed to what was left of a woman. Her legs were missing, and she'd been gutted. Now, she was an accessory. A flesh-eating charm bracelet, being lugged around by the Hulk. Bringing up the shotgun, Jerry aimed at the big man's neck and let the recoil do the rest. The blast obliterated his cranium, leaving the stump of his rotten neck as he fell. Moving on, he easily avoided larger clusters by hiding or detouring to stay out of the way. Trying to avoid problems led him straight into something he hadn't seen in a while. Runners. There were 2 of them, both young women in their early 20s, and both half naked. A few things immediately struck him as odd. Unlike the majority of the dead he faced, these almost looked untouched. Aside from their milky eyes and discolored flesh, they had no visible injuries. Something else that stuck out was the fact that they were clean. Most zombies were covered in gore and were missing at least one body part. These two were home and in great shape. Unfortunately, that meant trouble. The first one to spot him was a voluptuous brunette that was naked from the waist down. She snarled and released a feral scream before sprinting towards him. The noise acted as an alarm. The other runner, a slim woman wearing a swimsuit, joined in. They were moving fast, and center mass might not bring them down, so Jerry aimed at their legs and unloaded the shotgun. The brunette took 2 rounds before she face-planted on the pavement and started crawling. One of the shots hit her just above the knee and took off the bottom part of her leg. The third shot hit the redhead in the swimsuit on the left hip. The blast took a chunk of flesh and knocked her off balance, but she kept coming. The last 4 rounds destroyed her legs before the gun clicked empty. With the pair of them still crawling towards him, Jerry reloaded, then got moving. There was no point in finishing them off, and he could already hear more coming. It was safer to head out. The rest of the trip took longer than it should have. After having to hide 3 more times and outrun 2 more clusters, exhaustion was kicking in, but he had made it home. Chapter 6. Waterlogged. Swimming to the closest dock, Daniel pulled himself out of the water, then got up and looked around. When he didn't see Virginia, he panicked. They'd gone into the water together. She should have resurfaced already. There were so many zombies falling into the water, it was hard to tell one shape from another. After a few seconds, he spotted her floating face up and dove in after her. The waves coming from the dead hitting the water were pushing her away from them, so getting her was easy. She was bleeding from a gash in her right temple and was unconscious. Daniel was exhausted. Dragging Virginia out of the water took maximum effort. By the time he'd gotten her on shore and made sure she was breathing, he was spent. Taking a moment to catch his breath, Daniel looked around and realized they'd fucked up. They'd forgotten one important detail. The section of the canal that runs behind the homes wasn't that deep. A lot of the bloated zombies were floating away, but some of the others were already coming on shore. Daniel was running out of time. They weren't going to make it back to the building. The house they'd come up behind would have to do. It was a small brick number with a raised wooden deck attached to the rear of it. Mustering up what little energy he had, he picked up Virginia and started towards the house. They'd made it halfway across the yard before the dead caught up to them. The bloated corpse of a man groaned and launched towards them, signaling others to follow. It didn't take long for 1 to become 2, and 2 was becoming a few more, a lot faster than Daniel would have liked. Forced to pick up his pace, he managed to trot, but Virginia's shifting weight in his arms was pulling him off balance. He struggled, nearly falling several times before finally making it to the deck. As soon as they reached the top of the stairs, he dropped her. The sound of her hitting the ground made him wince, but there was no time to be gentle. Grabbing everything he could get his hands on, Daniel started blocking the stairs. He just wedged an oversized barbecue pit between the handrail and the wall, where Virginia gasped, then rolled on her side, coughing. Daniel was glad to see her moving, but the dead were already pressing against the blockade. After tossing the last of the deck furniture on the pile, he went over to the sliding patio door and yanked on it. It took a few hard pulls to get it open. He pulled the door off the track, but it worked. They got inside, forced it closed, then barricaded the door. In the chaos of the moment, neither of them paid much attention to what was in the house. As soon as they felt the barricade was stable, it hit them. A thick, nauseating funk flooded their lungs and stung their eyes, putting them both on alert. There was something dead in there with them, but they were too tired to do anything about it. Wet, exhausted, and running out of time, they sat there for a moment, trying to catch a second wind. Sooner or later, the zombies would get on the patio. They needed to be gone before that happened. Taking a couple of deep breaths, Daniel got to his feet and nearly fell over. The wet layers of clothing he was wearing were way too heavy. Running would be next to impossible. He had to strip off some of the weight. As he pulled off his jacket, he paused. The pistol was still in his pocket. He'd zipped it shut so it didn't drop while they were running. Unzipping it and pulling out the gun, he hoped it still fired, and set it aside and finished stripping down. While losing layers of protection worried him, having the pistol was a bonus. After taking off his hoodie and a layer of thermals, Daniel grabbed the gun and looked over at Virginia.
What happened out there? How'd you get hurt?
Wincing and rubbing the back of her neck, Virginia shrugged.
When you didn't come up, I started looking for you. When I found you, one of those things was pulling you down, so I tried to help. I remember swimming down and grabbing your ankle. The next thing I know, I'm hitting the ground and you're stacking stuff on the stairs.
It only took a second for Daniel to realize it had been her he'd kicked and not a zombie. He wanted to tell her, but right now wasn't the time.
We gotta get out of here. Those things are gonna...
Before he could get a word out, a loud crash from the deck cut him off. Time was up. The dead were coming. Without another word, Daniel helped Virginia up, and they headed for the front of the house. As they passed the small sitting room, they found out what the smell had been coming from. There were two bodies, an elderly couple. Their pictures were all over the house. The man was tied up on the sofa with a bullet hole in his head. The woman was sitting propped up in a recliner. She'd been bit, but managed to end it before she turned. The gun she'd used, an old 1911, was still clutched in her hand. The sound of shattering glass told him it was time to go. Virginia hurried over to grab the gun, but the old lady had a death grip. By the time she'd wrestled it free, zombies were pushing through the barricade. Choking back the bile in her throat, she rushed out of the room and found Daniel opening the front door. The street out front wasn't exactly clear, but it was a lot better than what was behind them. Once Virginia was outside, Daniel aimed at the first zombie to stagger into view and fired. He did it to check the gun, but managed to score a headshot. Smiling, slightly proud of himself, he closed the door. Then the two of them took off for the City Hall building. Chapter 7. Addiction. Storm clouds rolled across the morning sky as Andrew laid in bed staring at the ceiling. It had been days since the raid, but he couldn't get it out of his mind. Killing the zombies hadn't bothered him as much as he thought it would. As a matter of fact, he was having a hard time remembering any of it. The thing he couldn't stop thinking about was that overwhelming sense of power he'd felt when he took control. Sure, a few people died, but the ones who'd truly stood by him survived. There was something about it that gave him a buzz. It was like their energy gave him energy, and together, they were unstoppable. The feeling only grew when the raid pulled enough food to last a couple of weeks. Since then, people were happy to see him and his friends when they walked the halls. The thing was, that buzz was starting to fade. As time went on and the food ran out, they'd forget about it and be focused on the next step. Andrew didn't like that. The thought of not having power made him nervous. There had to be a way to keep it going, but for now, he had another issue. His mom. Beth seemed okay when she was awake, but she spent most of her time asleep. He was starting to think the pills were becoming a problem. Glancing over at her in her bed, he shook his head. A lot had happened. Neither of them had fully processed what happened to Roy. Losing his dad was hard. He couldn't imagine what it was doing to her. Quietly slipping out of bed and putting on his shoes, Andrew took one last look at his mother, then quietly stepped out into the hall. It was early. Almost everyone was still asleep, but he knew one person would be awake. Chuck. Chuck was always up before dawn. He claimed it was a habit from playing football, but Andrew knew better. The truth was, Chuck had nightmares that caused him to piss himself. He'd get up early to clean up, then go hang out on the roof till everyone was awake. Andrew found out about it by accident. He'd been up early one morning and caught Chuck washing his clothes in the restroom sink. Of course, the secret stayed between them, but because of it, he knew exactly where to find him. Without electricity, the corridors of the building were eerie. The only light came from the windows or the occasional battery-operated lantern. Every section had dark spots that felt like they stretched on forever. There were times when he'd speed up to the point of running, just to get through them. When he finally made it to the main hall, he stopped. There was something about it that grabbed his attention. For a moment, he imagined himself standing on the platform, talking to a crowd of people. That thought made him smile, and he couldn't resist. Quickly making his way to the platform, he stepped up, then turned to look out at the empty seats. The electric sensation of power surged through his body, while visions of imaginary crowds filled his mind. For a second, he could almost hear their voices. Lost in the moment, he raised his hands to calm them down, then realized the voices he was hearing were real. Snapping back to reality, the sound of people talking drifted in. The voices were hard to make out at first. They were too far away. It took a while for him to zero in on where they were coming from. By the sound of it, they were in the kitchen. Moving slowly, he crossed the room. As he got closer, another sound drifted in. A muffled growling accompanied the conversation. When he was close enough to peep through the serving window, he cautiously took a look. It was Mr. Gilroy and two men he didn't recognize. Andrew assumed they were new, but that wasn't the strangest part. The two men were carrying a zombie that had been bound and gagged while Gilroy directed them. Making things worse, Andrew recognized the zombie. It was one of the people who had been injured during the raid. He wondered what happened to them. No one had seen them since that day. As the two men carried the dead thing to the basement, Gilroy stopped. He stood there, holding the lantern and silently looking around the kitchen. Thinking maybe he'd hurt him, Andrew ducked down before the old man looked his way. After a few seconds, one of the men said,
"Let's get a move on. This thing's getting heavy."
There was a long moment of silence before Gilroy finally replied,
"Indeed. Careful with this one. I need it intact."
The two men grunted and grumbled as their voices got further away. When Andrew heard the basement door shut, he immediately headed out. Whatever that was, it could wait. He had his own problems. Moving as fast as he could without running, he hurried across the room. His heart dropped the moment he crossed the platform. There was someone sitting in the front row, watching him. It was Mouse. Her pale skin and bright eyes almost seemed to glow in the dark when she smiled at him. Slowing down, but not stopping, Andrew watched her, watching him, as she stepped down and headed for the stairs. Neither of them said a word. They didn't have to. Andrew knew he was caught, and so did she. That smirk on her face said it all. Turning the corner, Andrew picked up the pace and headed for the roof. When he got there, Chuck was in his usual spot, watching the zombies on the street. Trying not to think about what just happened, he stepped up next to him and got a look for himself.
Rough night?
Chuck slightly nodded while keeping his attention on the dead.
Yeah, it's getting better, though. What's got you up so early?
A lot. I've been thinking about another raid. The food's going fast. It's gonna be gone soon.
You think they'll let us do it again? People died. I'm pretty sure no one wants to go back out there.
We didn't lose anyone, they did. You, me, and the others made it back without a scratch. That has to mean something. Think about it.
Finally turning to look at Andrew, Chuck hesitated for a second, then shook his head.
I'm not sure anything means anything anymore. Besides, what are we supposed to do? Keep going out there?
Yeah, that's exactly what we should do. Who else is gonna do it? You said it yourself. No one wants to go.
Pausing for a second, Andrew pointed at a set of buildings directly behind the gas station.
That's a school. Schools have cafeterias, right?
Chuck nodded, then went wide-eyed as he caught on to what Andrew was getting at.
Shit, there has to be a ton of food just sitting there, going bad.
That's what I'm saying. You, me, and the guys could go over there and get it.
There's no way they're gonna let us do this. As soon as we bring it up, they're gonna say no.
Then we won't bring it up. We don't need permission to go outside. Gilroy and his people are surviving like everyone else. They can't tell us what to do. We should at least go over and take a look. If there's food, we tell the others and make it happen. If it's a blank trip, then there's nothing to say.
Thinking it over for a second, Chuck thoughtfully nodded, then looked at the school.
They're gonna want proof. We should bring something back if there's anything there.
If we had a camera, we could take pictures. It'd be a lot easier than lugging shit around.
I know where we can get one, but I'm gonna have to tell someone what we're planning to get it.
Who?
Chuck smiled and scratched his head.
I saw that hippie chick with the bracelets taking pictures with one of those old school cameras. You know, the ones that spit out the picture and you have to shake it for a few seconds. I'm pretty sure she'll let me use it.
Andrew chuckled. The hippie chick was Cassie, and Chuck had been borderline obsessed with her. He was using this as an excuse to talk to her.
Whatever. If you can get it, get it. Either way, we'll go tonight. Meet me by the stairs around 10.
With their plans made, Andrew hurried back to his room, making sure to avoid running into anyone. When he got there, Mouse was waiting for him at the door. Rather than waiting for her to say anything, Andrew held up his hands and shook his head.
Look, I don't know what's going on, and I don't care. Get out of my way.
Silently nodding her head, Mouse smirked, then glanced over his shoulder, causing him to turn around. He paused. Gilroy and one of the men he'd seen him with were coming down the hall. A combination of anger and anxiety washed over him as he glared at Mouse one last time before the two men stopped within a few feet of him. Clearing his throat and flashing that creepy smile, Gilroy spoke.
Good morning, Andrew, isn't it? It's been brought to my attention that you were in the main hall earlier. Is that true?
Andrew nodded and shot Mouse an angry look before responding.
Yes, sir. I was just goofing around. I didn't mean to cause any trouble.
Trouble? Oh, my dear boy, there's no trouble. My associate, Mr. Tolliver, and I were simply taking care of something. So there's no confusion. We'd like you to accompany us. I want to show you what we were doing.
I can't right now. I need to check on my mom. She isn't doing so good.
I'm sure she'll be fine. This will only take a minute. Come along.
Andrew didn't want to go, but he got the feeling Gilroy wasn't asking. Reluctantly nodding, he agreed and went with them. Along the way, Gilroy explained.
You see, in order to fight an enemy, you must first know their motivations, see what drives them. Thanks to you and your friends, we now have the opportunity to study these poor creatures. It's my belief that the more we know, the better off we'll be. Do you agree?
Andrew nodded, and the old man smiled.
Good. I thought you might. I'd also like to mention that I've noticed your role amongst your peers. It's quite impressive to see someone so young step up and take charge. If you don't mind me asking, where's your father?
He didn't make it. One of those things bit him and he turned. We had to leave him behind.
My condolences. I didn't intend to broach a touchy subject. We've all lost someone to this plague. In the few encounters I've had with your mother, she seems to be a strong woman. Was she in the military?
Andrew nodded again, and Gilroy gave a slight grin.
I thought so. She has that air about her.
Coming to a stop outside the main hall, Gilroy turned to face him.
I know you've been face to face with these creatures, but I must warn you, the things you are about to see may strike you as disturbing. I assure you everything we're doing is for the greater good. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Gilroy smiled, then patted him on the shoulder and looked at Mr. Tolliver.
Go check on his mother, then gather the others and prepare breakfast. We shouldn't be long.
Tolliver nodded, then turned and walked away, leaving them alone. Andrew hadn't noticed Mouse wasn't with them till that moment. He wondered where she'd snuck off to, but quickly put it out of his mind when they crossed the main hall. As they passed through the kitchen, his heart started to race. He imagined a medieval torture chamber with zombies strung up on the walls. When the door to the basement opened, the first thing he noticed were the stairs. They seemed to never end, but as soon as they reached the bottom, the smell of rotting flesh hit him. Seeing the boy's reaction, Gilroy chuckled, then held up a finger as if he'd remembered something. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small container of vapor rub. Opening it, he dabbed a little on his index finger, then smeared the paste under his nose. Handing it to Andrew, he told him it would help mask the smell, so he did the same. When the door opened, the first thing he noticed was that there was electricity in this part of the building. He wondered how they still had power, but that thought escaped him when he saw what was in the center of the room. Strung up by chains connected to the ceiling was the zombie he'd seen with them. Andrew's first thought was to turn around and get out of there, but he didn't. Instead, he watched Gilroy walk over to it and attempt to communicate with it. Obviously, it was a one-sided conversation, and when Gilroy was done, he looked over at Andrew.
No matter what, we must remember these creatures were once our family. While they may be dangerous, they're still God's children. Dispatching them shouldn't be taken lightly. Putting them down is not a game. I watched you and your friends during the raid. Bravery you displayed was amazing. But what I saw troubled me. You seem to take joy in destroying these poor souls. Am I correct in my assessment?
Roy once told him, if you wanted to be taken seriously, always look people in the eye when you were talking to them. Focusing on Gilroy, Andrew took a second to think it over.
I can't explain it. I don't really remember the killing. It was something else. I felt like that was where I was supposed to be. We all felt it. And when we were the last ones standing, all we could do was laugh. I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth.
Gilroy stood there silently for a moment before giving a slight nod, then stepping aside. Glancing at the snarling zombie, then back to Andrew, he asked in a sincere tone,
What do you feel when you look at one of them?
This was the first time he'd been around one of them without being attacked. Andrew took a moment to really look at the thing, then shook his head and put his attention back on the old man.
Nothing. I don't feel anything when I look at them. Why are you keeping one down here?
I believe we can learn a lot by observing them. At the very least, we'll discover how long it takes for them to rot away.
For some reason, Andrew didn't believe the old guy. There was something about him that felt off. Their conversation dragged on for a while longer, so Mr. Tolliver entered the room to tell Gilroy there was a problem. As the three of them hurried up the stairs, Gilroy, who was ahead of Andrew, stopped and turned around.
I trust what you saw down there will stay between us. I wouldn't want to stir up the others.
At that point, he would have said anything to get out of the basement, so Andrew gave him a nod, and they were off. As soon as he was free of Gilroy and Tolliver, he rushed back to his room, woke up Beth, and told her everything. Chapter 8. There Goes the Neighborhood. The journey home hadn't helped. Jerry had done his best to avoid the dead, but several managed to follow him. By the time he'd made it back to his building, there were 7 or 8 of them on his tail. They were too slow to keep up, so getting inside wasn't hard, but now they were pounding against the rear entrance. The noise was attracting attention from the street, and within an hour, the building would be surrounded. As bad as it was, Jerry was a little excited. He'd spent weeks securing the first floor. This was the first time any of it would be tested. A sandbag wall completely blocked off the lobby, and he'd done the same for the patio doors in the apartments. He'd even convinced Cindy to build a wall of her own. Of course, she wouldn't open the door with him around, so he'd leave the sandbags in the hall. Aside from that, there were 10 windows on the first floor. He'd taken his time measuring and cutting pieces of sturdy plywood he'd scavenged. Each piece fit the window frames perfectly and were held in place by screws. As a finishing touch, he'd spray painted them black. From a distance, no one would notice they were there. Last but not least was the rear door. It was the only way in or out from the first floor. The door itself was fairly sturdy. All he'd added were 3 braces on the top, middle, and bottom. All 3 4x4s dropped into cradles he'd mounted on the walls on either side of the door. All in all, he felt certain the zombies couldn't get in. Frustrated and exhausted, he stood listening to the dead clawing at the door. Flashbacks of what happened at the school bothered him. Jerry couldn't figure out why anyone would let those things out. On top of that, they went out of their way to draw more in with the radio. The longer he thought about it, the more confusing it got. The one thing he knew for sure was he wouldn't be going outside for a while. As he turned to go upstairs, he glanced at Cindy's door and shook his head. He didn't feel like talking, but she needed to know what was going on. Making his way over, he tapped twice, and she answered almost immediately.
I heard gunshots. What happened?
Taking a deep breath, Jerry paused for a moment, wishing he had a cigarette.
It was the gang I told you about. They opened the school and hung up a radio to attract more of those fucking things. They're everywhere. A few of them followed me back here.
Cindy hesitantly asked.
How bad is it?
Bad. I'm pretty sure the building's surrounded. If we keep it down, they'll eventually wander off, but there's enough out there to keep us trapped for a while.
Cindy got quiet again. After a pause long enough to make Jerry want to walk away, she asked,
Are you sure it was the same gang?
Nodding his head as if she could see him through the door, Jerry caught himself and almost laughed.
Yeah, I'm sure. They had the same patch on their jackets, an angel with devil horns. I saw at least 20 of them, but there could be more. It doesn't matter. They're not important right now. The zombies are gonna be a problem. I don't think they can get in, but if you're gonna stay down here, you should keep an eye out.
Cindy didn't respond to that. Instead, she tapped on the door to end the conversation, and Jerry headed off to his apartment. After a quick meal of canned chili and crackers, he stripped out of his armor and climbed into bed. Sleep came easily that night. Almost as soon as his head hit the pillow, he was snoring. The next morning, the thunderous sound of heavy artillery shocked Jerry out of his sleep. Falling out of bed, he crawled over to the window to get a look, and his jaw dropped. The gang was back, and they were sweeping the streets, converging on the evacuation site. There had to be at least 40 of them now, and they were coming from all directions. For the most part, they were coordinated. The front line of men and women, armed with assault rifles, slowly moved in, mowing down zombies. Behind them, smaller groups took out the stragglers with whatever they had. Some used machetes, a few used knives. Jerry even saw one guy with a double-bladed battle axe. Despite all their efforts, they lost a few people on the way in. But when it was over, the zombies were gone, and the gang had control of Quickstead. Over the next couple of days, the gang, which Jerry discovered was called the Fallen, gathered corpses into piles and burned them. The smell was horrible, but he learned a lot by watching them. For starters, the bodies by themselves didn't burn for long. They would add things like scrap wood or tires to the blaze to keep it going. They would also chop the bodies up to make them easier to move. It seemed like a waste of energy, but he took note all the same. A detail he hadn't noticed right away was the fact that they all wore raincoats and covered their faces with masks when they were working. It made sense. They were avoiding getting exposed to anything that might be in the blood. They also did something else he found interesting. They were collecting skulls from the ash piles. The ones that were intact got a quick rinse in a bucket of water, then placed in garbage bags. When the bags were full, they'd be taken into the building. It was a strange thing to do, and Jerry didn't see a reason for it, but he added it to his notes anyway. Between clearing the stragglers out of the buildings and dragging the dead off the streets, it took 2 weeks for them to finish. Every other day, Jerry would pass his notes under Cindy's door, and they'd talk about leaving. He'd do his best to convince her it was time to go, but she didn't want to. The fact was, they'd been living together in this building for over a month, and they'd never been face to face. She was so terrified that she didn't want to open the door. Jerry could see why she wanted to stay, but things were changing. Sooner or later, the gang would start clearing the buildings around them. If that happened, they'd be discovered, and Jerry had a feeling that them being there would be a problem. Cindy's argument was, maybe they'd let them stay there once they knew the building wasn't full of zombies. It was a pipe dream, and Jerry knew it. But deep down, he didn't want to leave either. He'd put a lot of work into this place, and it had sort of become home. The idea of starting over made him cringe. Still, waiting for the gang to roll up on them was a lot worse. The one thing that kept him from packing up and shipping out was Cindy. He didn't want to leave her there to face the Fallen by herself. Oddly enough, he'd gotten used to their talks through the door. There was never any romance. It was just good to hear another voice and know there was someone else out there. The truth was, she was probably the only friend he'd made since moving out here for work. His family back in Texas had written him off years ago. They didn't call him, and he didn't call them. Considering the state of things, not having that connection had worked out in his favor. The problem was, now he'd made a connection, and he didn't want to lose it. Thinking he'd eventually be able to convince Cindy to leave, Jerry stayed and continued watching the gang. The morning after they'd burnt the last body, the gang started moving cars off the street. They were lining them up around the building, creating the base for a wall. Once they were in place, They'd strip them for parts and drain the fluids, then remove the tires. They filled the tires with dirt and used them to build the wall around the cars. That wall was going to take a while, and it gave Jerry an idea. Since the gang would be busy, he'd start going out to plant stashes of food and weapons. Each night he'd go a little further out, creating a path that would get them out of the area safely. Now all he had to do was figure out where they were going. He'd been thinking about moving east, dropping the supply stashes. According to the map, Lake St. Clair was the most logical spot. The lake would provide food, but finding the right building may be a problem. Thinking they'd tackle that issue later, Jerry got busy packing supplies for the first stash. The next morning, Jerry set out before dawn. His plan was to travel 10 miles out and plant the first stash. According to his calculations, the walk would take him around 3 hours. Accounting for zombies, blocked roads, and other survivors, he figured it would take a lot longer. The first half an hour went by with minimal complications. Aside from a few of the slower ones, there weren't many zombies around. Rather than waste energy putting them down, Jerry avoided them and kept moving. By the time he'd reached the outer edge of the next neighborhood, the sun was coming up on a gloomy morning. The sky was heavy with dense gray clouds, and the smell of rain in the air told him it was going to be a long day. Picking up the pace and passing the first few houses, he started seeing signs of life. Someone had gone through the trouble of dragging the bodies away and piling them up on a trailer. By the looks of it, something had gone wrong. The truck that was pulling the trailer had its doors open, and there was a body hanging out of the driver's side. He didn't have to get close to see that the body wasn't moving. Most of its head was missing. What concerned him was the blood was fresh, and the passenger door was open. To him, that meant there was someone else in the truck. But where were they? It also meant that the truck worked and probably had a decent amount of fuel in it. Having a vehicle added to the plan would be amazing. It was almost a little too convenient. Stopping in his tracks, Jerry took a second to really look around. There were no bullet holes in the windshield, so the shot either came from inside the truck or... Before he could finish that thought, a teenager aiming a hunting rifle at him popped up from behind the bushes on his left.
Stop right there!
Jerry instantly noticed the kid had a steady hand. There was no tremble. He wasn't nervous. Using slow, deliberate motions, Jerry took his finger off the trigger of his M4 and let it dangle from its strap as he showed the kid his hands.
Hey, I don't want any trouble. I'm just passing through.
Bullshit. I saw you. You were gonna steal my truck.
Seeing the anger in the boy's eyes told Jerry the kid was heating up.
Whoa, slow down. I admit the truck was tempting, but I didn't know you were here. I thought it was abandoned. Now that I know it's yours, I won't touch it.
Fuck that. What's in the bag?
That question let Jerry know this had been a trap. It pissed him off, but he kept his calm.
Nothing for you to worry about. We can still walk away from this. Lower that weapon, and I'll be on my way.
In his cockiness, the kid made a mistake. Instead of demanding Jerry toss over the bag, he went to step around the bush and got snagged on a branch. The instant the barrel of his gun was off target, Jerry grabbed his rifle, brought it up, and fired twice. The kid never stood a chance. Both shots hit him in the center of his chest. He was dead before he hit the ground. The reality of what just happened didn't hit Jerry till he went over to retrieve the boy's gun. Sure, he'd put down a couple of zombies, but this was a person. He'd never killed anyone before. Seeing the kid laying there was a gut punch he wasn't ready for. The raw emotion of it all hit him like a sledgehammer. It took all of his will to snap out of it and move on. After a quick search of the bushes, Jerry found a half-empty bottle of ammo for the rifle and a bottle of water. From there, he removed the body from the truck and detached it from the trailer. The truck cranked right up, and it had a little over half a tank. It smelled like shit, but he was happy to have it. The rest of the trip was a breeze. At the 10-mile mark, he stashed the truck in a garage of an abandoned house. When that was done, he hid the stash of weapons and food in the attic of the house, 2 doors down. Satisfied with his accomplishment, Jerry got some rest, then headed back after sundown. Over the next few days, he repeated the process and managed to get 2 more stashes in place before things went wrong. He'd had to stay out longer than usual thanks to a handful of runners that cornered him in a drugstore. When he finally did make it back, his building was surrounded by the gang, and they were emptying the place out. From his hiding spot, Jerry watched as they carted out everything he'd scavenged and loaded it into a truck. There was no sign of Cindy, so he assumed they'd either already taken her or she was hiding somewhere. It was nearly dawn when they finished, and as soon as they drove away, Jerry snuck into the building. The place was a mess. They'd taken everything. But worst of all, Cindy's apartment was empty. A part of him wanted to go reclaim the stashes he'd been planting and move on, but the rest of him wanted to find Cindy. No matter what he chose to do, the first thing he needed to do was rest. Since staying in the building was risky, he cautiously made his way out, then hid in the ice skating rink across the street. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but there was a clear view of the evacuation site, and he was able to lay low till nightfall. As the sun set, Jerry watched the gang put together what he thought was a scouting party. 6 rough-looking men stood silently listening to a beast of a man dishing out orders. By the look of the big guy, he was a lot older than the others, but he dwarfed the majority of them. When he was done, he went down the line shaking hands with all of them. Then they headed east on foot. Jerry had 2 choices. He could try to sneak into the stronghold and hope he could find Cindy, or he could follow the scouts. Sneaking into the building was next to impossible. They kept guards on watch 24 hours a day. Even if he did get in, there was no way of knowing where Cindy was being held. On the flip side of that, if he followed the scouts, he may have a shot of grabbing one of them and getting the information he needed. Both options were a long shot, but his best chance of accomplishing anything was with the scouts. With his decision made, Jerry watched the scouting party till they were a good distance away. Once he was certain he wouldn't be spotted, the hunt was on. Chapter 9. Fallen. It had been nearly a month since Daniel and Virginia led the zombies into the canal. Almost everyone was gone. Zoe and Pete were the only 2 from the original group that had stayed behind. The others loaded up in the car and took off the morning after everything happened. Daniel had been sharing his food with Virginia and Holly, while Pete and Zoe had their own. It was sort of an every man for himself situation, but sooner or later, the food would run out, and decisions would have to be made. In the weeks past, Daniel had gone out and found the radio he needed. Thanks to Pete, they were able to rig it up to a battery. He'd been in constant contact with Walter. Having the extra people aboard his boat turned out to be a big help. They'd been traveling day and night, only stopping to refuel and grab supplies. Unfortunately, 2 of the 3 people he'd picked up didn't make it. They'd been killed by zombies during their last stop. It was just Walter and a woman named Paula now, but they'd be arriving by the end of the week. The thought of escaping this hell had Daniel in a great mood. Virginia and Holly were just as excited, but everything wasn't all good on the home front. Besides the food issue, Zoe had been sleepwalking, and everyone was worried about her opening the door while they slept. On the other hand, Pete had been leaving late at night and coming back just before dawn. Daniel remembered him accusing one of the others of the same thing, and it made him wonder what Pete was up to. On top of all that, the dead had been more active than usual. They were seeing large groups migrating through the area. Almost all of them were slow, but there were still a good number of runners. What really stuck out about the groups was the fact that they were all headed in the same direction, west. At first, they thought maybe each group was following the noise of the others. That theory flew out the window once they started being separated by days. As odd as it was, Daniel really didn't care. In a few days, they'd be in the open ocean, far away from this nightmare, and he couldn't wait. The next morning when he woke up, he could hear an argument going on in the main lobby. Getting up and grabbing his gun, Daniel went to see what was going on. As he entered the lobby, he spotted Pete with some men he didn't recognize. One was tall and muscular, with long dark hair and a bushy beard. The other was slightly shorter and stocky, clean-shaven with a bald head. All 3 of them were wearing cuts, displaying patches, but Pete's said VP over his name. He was arguing with Virginia, and when Daniel entered the room, one of the new guys aimed a gun at him.
Right on time, Slim. Disarm that young man and have him take a seat.
Following Pete's orders, the big guy with the beard walked over and took Daniel's gun, then manhandled him over to a chair.
Now that we're all here, I need you to shut the fuck up and listen to what I'm about to say. Now, I told you all a while back that my brothers were coming to get me. Well, here they are. The thing is, there's been a change of plans. If you remember, I also told you we came here for a boat. When my main man Dan over here let me know he was here to meet someone, I knew I'd landed in the right place. So, here's what's gonna happen. When dear old Walter shows up, me and my brothers are gonna be taking the boat. To make sure that goes nice and smooth, Dan's gonna be our bargaining chip. Now that works out great for old Danny boy. It means we can't kill him yet. And that also means the rest of you are fair fucking game. So you sit back and shut up and let this happen, or you can fight me on this and see how far that gets you.
Daniel glared at Pete for a long second, trying to think of the right thing to say, but Virginia beat him to it.
Fuck you. We helped you. We kept you alive.
Pete scoffed.
How? By drawing in the dead and nearly getting all of us killed? Or by trading away a car you didn't need? Oh, I get it. After you fixed a problem that you caused, you thought you'd done us a favor. No, sweetheart. Shit don't work like that. The way I see it, we gave you 3 a safe place to be. Rent-free. And now it's time to pay up.
Rent fee? What are you saying? Dude, you were here just like us. We don't owe you shit. Zoe and Bruce are the ones that helped all of us. If anybody owes anything to anyone, we all owe them for being here in the first place.
Nodding, as if he agreed with Daniel's point, Pete smiled and walked over to where Zoe was sitting. Still smiling, he looked at her and said,
Thanks for all your help.
Then pulled a pistol from his waistband and shot her in the head.
Well, would you look at that? Seems like I'm the last one left. I guess that means you owe me now. How convenient. Fellas, would you mind tossing this shit? I wouldn't want her stinking up the place.
With that, Pete's men hurried over and picked Zoe up, then carried her corpse away. Holly, who'd become attached to Zoe, was crying her eyes out. Virginia was in shock, and Daniel found himself overcome with guilt. As much as he didn't like Zoe, his words had gotten her killed. It wasn't intentional. He had no way of knowing what Pete was capable of. Seeing people get killed by zombies was one thing, but this was completely different. Zoe wasn't a threat. The woman could barely get around, let alone cause problems. Pete killed her to prove a point.
What the fuck? Why? Why would you do that? She didn't have anything to do with this. You didn't have to shoot her.
Turning his gun on Daniel, Pete grinned.
I couldn't stand that old bitch. All she did was gripe and complain. I would have done it a long time ago, but there were too many people in the way. Now, in a few days, more of my brothers are going to be joining the party. Till then, you three are going to sit tight and keep your mouths shut. Well, some of you will.
He paused, grinning at Virginia.
We'll keep this one around for entertainment. As a matter of fact, when the boys get back, I might let them have a little taste. Gotta keep the troops happy.
Realizing exactly what he was getting at, Virginia got to her feet and pulled a knife she'd been hiding.
Touch me and see what happens, you piece of shit.
Pretending to be scared, Pete chuckled.
Oh, scary stuff. Come on, sweetheart, don't be like that. If you're good, one of them might make you his own lady. I doubt it, though. Once you've been passed around, nobody's gonna want to keep that trashed gash around for long.
As if on cue, Pete's men rushed in and tried to grab Virginia. Wildly swinging the blade around, she sliced one of them across the face and the other on the arm before Daniel jumped in. The scuffle didn't last long. Daniel managed to get a few good punches in before Pete stepped up behind him and cracked him in the back of the head with the pistol. The blow knocked him unconscious. When he came to, he'd been tied up and left in a broom closet. He'd had no idea how long he'd been out, but as the fog cleared from his brain, he could hear Virginia screaming. The thought of what they might be doing to her and Holly sickened him. These animals needed to be put down, and if he got out of this, he was going to make sure they got what they deserved. When the screaming stopped and the silence crept in, Daniel found himself thinking of Sydney. Even though they looked nothing alike, Virginia sort of reminded him of her. They had the same fiery attitude. In a different world, they probably would have been friends. Holly, on the other hand, was a quiet little girl whose bright eyes and a kind smile that seemed out of place in this new world. He couldn't imagine what kind of hell she was going through. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. He needed to get out of there, and he needed to do it now. After what felt like hours of squirming around in the dark, he managed to free one of his hands and start the process of untying himself. Once he was free, Daniel silently felt around in the dark, hoping to find something he could use as a weapon. Unfortunately, the closet had been cleaned out. The only thing he had was the rope he'd been tied up with. Rope versus guns and knives was a bad deal, but it would have to do. Wrapping his fist with the rope created a rock-hard surface that he hoped did enough damage to get him a weapon. The sound of approaching footsteps caused an adrenaline surge as he prepared himself to leap out and go to war. When the door opened, everything changed. Daniel found himself staring down the barrel of an AK-47, being held by the bald guy. Pete, who was standing off to the side, burst out laughing.
Holy shit, would you look at this? The balls on this guy. Oh, I am impressed. I fully expected you to be curled up in a corner, pissing yourself, but no, you're ready to slug it out. Oh, good for you. Too bad that shit didn't work. Now come out of there. You've got work to do.
For the next 3 days, Daniel was forced to clean and care for Virginia. To his surprise, Holly hadn't been touched. On the other hand, Virginia wasn't doing so well. She was a battered, bloody mess and spent most of her time staring off into space. They'd been drugging her. Going by the track marks on her arm, they'd been dosing her with heroin to keep her docile. The sight of her brought tears to his eyes. Whenever he had the chance, he tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond. On the 4th day, Walter called, and they put Daniel on the radio to talk to him.
About time I got you on the horn, son. We're 2 days out. How's everything on that end?
Daniel hesitated for a second, till Pete shoved a gun in his ribs.
Everything's okay. We're running low on food, but there haven't been many of those things around lately. Oh, I saw Sid not too long ago. She wanted me to tell you she was safe. She was headed for the cabin.
There was a long pause before Walter responded. Daniel just hoped he understood what he was trying to say.
That's good. Maybe we can go by there and get her before we leave.
He took the hint. Daniel had to choke back the urge to smirk.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a good idea. There's a lot of rough terrain between here and there. 3 or 4 people go missing out here every year. Maybe more now that the dead are everywhere.
You're right. I'm sure she'll be fine. That reminds me, I cleaned out that old storage unit before I left. You wouldn't believe some of the stuff I found.
That's great. I can't wait to see what you've got. Well, Pops, my batteries are getting low. I'm gonna have to cut it short this time. See you in a couple of days. Stay safe out there.
Same to you. See you soon.
With that, the transmission was ended, and Daniel was taken back to the closet. As soon as the door closed, he couldn't help but smile. The storage Walter mentioned was actually a shipping container he used to house his gun collection. What Pete and his goons didn't know was, Walter was a Marine. Even at his age, he was capable of doing some real damage with a gun in his hands. If they wanted that boat, they were going to have to fight for it. And Daniel's money was on Walt. Chapter 10: Separation. After hearing the news of Gilroy keeping zombies in the basement and Andrew's plan for a second raid, Beth sat silent for a moment. If there was ever a reason to leave the church, this would be it. The problem was, she could see Andrew wanted to stay. At least that's what she told herself. Deep down, a part of it was the pills. She'd been enjoying her escape from reality, but now, it was time to get focused.
He's right. Something like that might cause issues. Let's keep it quiet for now. As for you and this raid, my answer is no. We don't know what's in that building. It could be packed. It's too dangerous.
Andrew shifted in his seat, trying to stay calm.
Okay, just hear me out. We could go and take a look. If the building is packed, we won't go in. If it's empty, we'll go in, take a quick look, and if there's food, we come back and tell the others about it in the morning.
Beth was about to say no for a second time when an idea hit her. Getting up and going over to the window, she looked out at the school, then nodded.
Okay, just a look, right? Sure, you can go, but I'm going with you.
The expression on his face was priceless. If his jaw could have scraped the floor, it would have. Beth smirked.
Now that I think about it, there's a couple of people that might want to help. Yeah, this could work out. Great idea, Du. I'll go ask around. See you later.
Without waiting for him to respond, she walked out of the room with a smile on her face. Andrew was stumped. All he managed to say was,
"Wait, what?"
before the door slammed shut. When 10 o'clock rolled around, everyone in the building knew what was happening. Andrew and Chuck's scouting party had officially become a full-fledged raid, led by Beth. He should have been happy to see his mother getting back on her feet, but part of him felt slighted. She'd stolen some of his thunder, and Andrew wasn't sure how to process it. Trying to not let it bother him, he pushed the thought out of his mind and stood ready with his friends. There would be 2 teams. Of course, Gilroy wouldn't let something like this happen without his people, so Mouse would be with Andrew's crew, and Mr. Tolliver would be joining Beth's group. The 2 groups would go in and clear the school. Once it was safe, they'd clear out the cafeteria. Just like last time, everyone would be armed, but guns were a last resort. The goal was to get in and get out without losing anyone. If they pulled it off, the plan was to start doing daily raids for supplies. It was a cold night under a full moon when they stepped out onto the street. A handful of the dead shambled by, giving Andrew an adrenaline rush as they groaned, catching the scent of fresh flesh. Instinctively drawing his knife and changing direction, Andrew turned and moved towards the last of the zombies. Following his lead, Chuck and the rest of the team split from the adults. The move confused the zombies and broke up the pack, leaving Andrew's group with 3 to take down. This was better than he imagined. The 7 of them moved together without words. They flowed around the uncoordinated dead things, picking them apart. Outstretched arms were hacked away, legs were broken, and skulls were crushed. It was brutal, disgusting work, but to Andrew, it was beautiful. The spray of blood, the crack of bone, the groans of the dead filling his head, mixing with the sound of his pounding heart. It was perfect, and he wanted more. The adults had been left with 4 zombies of their own to deal with. For Beth, this was her first time since Roy. This time was different. She was ready. Armed with a machete, she stared down what was left of a construction worker lumbering towards her. By the look of him, he used to be pretty big. Now, he was a saggy bag of rotten meat in a reflective vest. Most of his face had been eaten away, leaving an exposed skull crawling with maggots, and he was missing an arm. Easily avoiding the lunging swipes, Beth swung the machete high and buried it in the zombie's neck. When the blade hit bone, it stopped and was snatched out of her hand by the big guy staggering. Almost losing her balance, Beth righted herself and pulled her knife. After being off her feet for a month, her reflexes were slow and her movements felt forced. Remembering her training, she drove the heel of her boot into his knee, and the big man went down. When he hit the ground, Beth stepped around to his head and plunged the knife through the back of his skull. There was a moment of disbelief that caused her to freeze up for a second. It wasn't till a member of her team, Arnold Briggs, pointed to Andrew's team that she snapped out of it. They were headed for the school, and she didn't want them getting too far ahead. Lucky for her, the machete came dislodged, and all she had to do was pick it up. The knife was another story. It was handled deep in the dead man's skull. Pulling it free resulted in a series of nauseating, wet squelching sounds that nearly made her give up. Once she'd gotten it out and rejoined the group, and they quickly caught up. The raid on the school turned out to be a bittersweet victory. No one was injured, and they cleared the school with minimal effort. The cafeteria wasn't the gold mine they'd hoped for. All of the food in the freezers was rotten. There was no point in trying to salvage any of it. There was an industrial-sized can of vegetables and a few 50-pound bags of rice and flour. There was also a decent assortment of spices, along with pots and pans they could use. In all, it wasn't a bad haul, but it was great motivation. Even Gilroy got in on planning the next raid. For the first time, everyone was on the same page. The excitement caused a buzz in the main hall, and Andrew and his friends were in the center of it. The addition of his mother and the adults being on board made it that much better. This was it. He'd wanted this feeling to last forever. He couldn't help but smile as the group sat, poring over a map of the city. Gilroy pointed out a distribution hub on the east side. There were 10 warehouses that shipped out of the hub. Most were perishables like meat and produce, but 2 of them were strictly dry goods. This sparked a huge debate. They would need vehicles to move that much food, and that meant making noise. The other potential problem was that there could be other survivors already there. Beth wanted to send a scouting party out on foot, but Gilroy wanted to make one trip. In the end, they met somewhere in the middle. The raiding party would get half a day's head start to clear a path if necessary. At the halfway point, a box truck driven by one of Gilroy's people would be on the way. By the time the truck catches up, the raiding party should be at the hub. If there were survivors to contend with, they'd try to talk to them. If that didn't work, they'd leave without question. If the place was empty, they'd get what they could as fast as they could, because there would be zombies following the sound of the truck. After mapping out fallback points and contingency plans, everyone spent the day resting and getting ready. The next morning, as they were gearing up to leave, Beth pulled Andrew aside.
I've been thinking about what you told me. When we get back, we should let everyone know about the basement. What he's doing is dangerous. If one of those things gets loose in the church, a lot of people could die. We can't let that happen, Drew. We have to stop him.
Thinking about it for a second, Andrew nodded.
Okay. But what if he gets mad and throws us out?
Beth smiled and glanced around at everyone.
Throw us out? Look at these people. They're not following him out there. They're following us. He knows it. We know it. And most importantly, they know it. There's nothing to worry about. Trust me. We'll be fine.
Andrew took a second look at the raiding party and stopped when he noticed Jessica watching him. She gave him a nod, which he returned, then put his attention back on his mother. Before he could say anything, Beth gave him a funny look and smirked.
What was that?
Realizing he'd been caught, Andrew blushed a little and put his head down. Not wanting to embarrass him, Beth backed off, but she couldn't help but smile.
Anyway, listen, stay focused out there. This is the furthest we've been. Things might get bad. A few of us might not make it back. Are you ready for that?
He didn't hesitate to give her a quick nod of his head. In that moment, she saw it. It was so slight that anyone else would have missed it. There was a look in his eyes she'd seen before, and she didn't like it. A dead-eyed glare that sent goosebumps up her arms. It only lasted for an instant, but she'd caught it. She wanted to say something, but there was no time. They'd have to talk about it later. After a big hug, they parted ways and the raiding party hit the streets. The first few hours were spent moving cars and clearing roads for the truck. There were zombies in a lot of the cars, and most were out of gas, so the trip was slow going for a while. Occasionally, they'd hit open stretches, but the dead were everywhere. They couldn't pass a block without having to put a few down. 4 hours in, and they were more than halfway there. All of them were exhausted, but they weren't slowing down. A little under 2 hours later, they were staring at the hub. The layout was simple. 2 rows of 5 warehouses, separated by a lot big enough for semis to load and unload. The 2 dry good distributors were on separate sides. One was located at the end of the first row. The other was on the center of the second row. There were a few zombies roaming around, and one of the warehouses had been burnt down, but there didn't appear to be any survivors held up in there. To make things go faster, Andrew and his crew took the warehouse on the first row, leaving Beth and her team to search the other. Andrew and his crew moved through the lot, with Beth's team watching their backs. Once they disappeared into the warehouse, Team 2 got moving. They crossed the lot, cutting down a few zombies along the way. When they got to their target, Briggs and Mr. Tolliver got the doors open, while Beth and the others stood guard. Once they were inside, Briggs stayed at the door to keep watch. As soon as they stepped in, it was obvious someone had been staying here. A pair of empty sleeping bags had been laid out, and there were empty food containers scattered around. There was no blood and no sign of trouble till they made it to the restrooms. The only corpse they found was in the men's room. It wasn't a zombie, but Beth sort of wished it had been. Some poor soul had gone into one of the stalls and blown his brains out. Beth stood there staring at the body till someone called out, "All clear." Whoever the other sleeping bag was for, they weren't in the building. She figured that was probably why this guy killed himself. Pushing that thought aside and grabbing the gun, she hurried off to join the others. This place was a gold mine. Pallets of beans, rice, powdered soups, noodles, you name it, they had it. There was so much, they'd have to make multiple trips to get it all. Beth wondered what Drew and his team had found. If it was anything near this, they would have food for months. The excitement of the moment got to everyone. They all laughed and picked through boxes, talking about what they'd eat first. The fun didn't last long. The sound of an engine caught their attention. Gilroy's guys had arrived early. They all stood in stunned silence, listening to the truck back up to the dock. Once it was in place, Mr. Tolliver and Davis let the rolling door up, then opened the rear of the truck. As the door opened, almost everyone gasped. Gilroy and that young couple, the Clarks, from the church were inside. The Clarks were armed with assault rifles, and the moment Gilroy locked eyes with Beth, she knew what was coming. There was an explosion of gunfire as Beth and her team were gunned down. She felt a bullet rip through her arm, then another through her leg, spinning her off balance. A third shot grazed her head. It hit just above her left eye and carved a groove that stopped over her ear. It wasn't a fatal injury, but she went down hard and blacked out when she hit the ground. The sound of an engine followed by gunfire grabbed Andrew and his team's attention. They'd been dealing with zombies since they entered the warehouse, and they hadn't gotten a chance to search the place. A group of 9 people had been in this building. At some point, one of them must have turned and infected the rest. The place was a mess and smelled horrible, but worst of all, a couple of them were runners. They must have been the last to go. Ultimately, it didn't matter. Andrew and his team made quick work of them, then went to see what was going on. When the bay door went up, they immediately saw the truck and the horde of zombies that had been following it. They were still a good ways off, but time was ticking. Andrew couldn't see what they were shooting at, so he assumed there had been zombies in the building. Whatever had happened, they were moving fast. He could see bags being loaded into the truck. Narrowing his eyes, Andrew tried to spot his mom, but he couldn't see her. They were cutting it close. The front of the horde was through the main gates and spilling into the lot. Since there was no reason to keep quiet, Andrew and his team pulled their guns and started firing into the oncoming crowd. They dropped a few of them, but most of their shots did little to slow the horde. Whoever the driver was, they must have realized time was up. The horn blared, and people hopped in the truck. Rather than waiting for it to get to them, Andrew's team charged into the lot and met them halfway. As they rounded the rear of the truck, Andrew's heart stopped when he saw Gilroy, Mr. Tolliver, and the Clarks.
Where is she? Where's my mom?
Extending a hand to help him into the truck, Gilroy shouted back.
I'm sorry, son. She and the others didn't make it. Get in. We have to go.
Those words landed like a shotgun blast to his chest. His body went numb, and his heart sank to the pit of his stomach. He couldn't move, think, or speak. His team was forced to physically pick him up and put him in the truck so they could get out of there. As they passed by through the lot, running over zombies, Andrew stared at the pile of bodies on the dock and saw his mother one last time before they sped away. Chapter 11. The gang's all here. After tailing the gang's scouting party for most of the morning, Jerry found himself on the roof of a burnout storefront, watching them rest. They'd been there for 10 minutes and were preparing to leave when the sound of a vehicle caught everyone's attention. While the 6 of them were trying to get eyes on it, Jerry had a clear view. Having the high ground put him in the right place at the right time. 2 blocks over, you could see a box truck speeding down the street. By the look of it, they were heading for the set of warehouses at the end of the block. Unfortunately, the noise of the truck's engine was attracting attention. Behind them, a wave of dead shambled along, filling the streets. There were hundreds of them. Most of the horde was falling behind, but there were pockets of runners that were keeping the chase going. Being sure to keep an eye on the gang, Jerry glanced back to see them on the move. They'd spotted the truck and were making a beeline straight for it. In Jerry's mind, this had to be why the gang was out here. He didn't know if they were supposed to meet the truck or ambush it, but either way, this might be his only chance. The second they were out of his sight, he climbed down and followed their trail. They were moving fast. It took a minute to catch sight of them again. Once he'd finally got eyes on the tailman, automatic gunfire in the distance caused them to pick up the pace. Knowing he couldn't keep up, Jerry found a safe spot to duck into and watched. Paying close attention to their path, he waited till they turned the next corner, then moved out. As he crossed over to the next block, he took a quick look to his left and stopped. The dead were coming from everywhere. The horde itself was flooding the street, but others were coming out of hiding. They were falling from rooftops and crashing through windows, taking out sections of the crowd. The ones that hit the ground were the worst. The wet smack of the flesh colliding with concrete was something Jerry never wanted to hear again. Trying to keep quiet, he jogged through a short alleyway and came out in time to see the truck go speeding by. The rear cargo door was open and he saw people inside, but none of them were from the gang. He watched them disappear around the next corner and heard gunshots from the warehouse a few seconds later. Readying the M4 he'd brought, Jerry moved towards the sound of gunfire. Ahead of him, a rolled-up door had been left open, and there were 3 zombies on the dock, All three had been put down, but there was more gunfire coming from inside the building. Moving quickly, Jerry climbed onto the dock just as the shooting stopped. Listening intently, he stood perfectly still till gunfire coming from the far end of the lot caught his attention. Turning to get a look, he saw the gang coming out of a different building.
You gotta be fucking kidding me.
He'd picked the wrong warehouse. Now, he had to get inside before they saw him. The second he stepped through the roll-up door, he saw someone. It was dark in there, so it was hard to see at first, but as he got closer, he saw her. She was sitting on the ground, propped up against the wall. There was blood covering her face, and she was bleeding pretty badly. Jerry couldn't tell if she was alive till her eyes popped open, and she pointed a gun at him.
Where is he?
She could barely keep the gun trained on him, and judging by the way her words were slurred, she was close to passing out. Seeing this, Jerry took his finger off the trigger, shushed her, then whispered,
Keep it down. They'll hear you.
As the words left his mouth, her hand dropped to her lap, and she slumped over. Letting out a sigh of relief, Jerry hurried over and took her gun, then risked a peep outside. The gang was running, and when he looked to the gate, he could see why. The horde was coming. The gang had a decent head start. If he went after them now, he might be able to keep up, but the dead would be on his heels. Thinking he'd be able to pick up their trail later, he pulled the roll-up door down and decided to wait it out. Looking at the woman there on the floor, Jerry considered letting her bleed out. She wasn't his responsibility, and she pointed a gun at him. The odds were, when she woke up, she'd probably try to kill him. Despite that, he did what he could to stop the bleeding. After cutting away her clothes and cleaning the wounds, he packed them with gauze, then wrapped them with bandages from his leg armor. There wasn't much he could do about the gash on her head. He bandaged and wrapped it, but she was going to need stitches, possibly staples. On the upside, she remained unconscious the whole time, so everything went well. Using a bottle of hand sanitizer to clean himself, Jerry glanced over at the woman and paused. She was basically naked. He didn't want to leave her laying there like that. As he started searching around, he found what she'd been shooting at. She'd put down a fourth zombie. The woman could barely keep her eyes open, and she dropped 4 of them. Slightly impressed, Jerry nodded to himself and was starting to move on when he noticed something. The last zombie looked familiar. Walking over to get a better look, he chuckled.
Briggs? Holy shit! How'd you…
Realizing he was talking to a corpse, he stopped himself and shook his head. Briggs had taken off when everything started. Jerry had wondered where he'd gone. Shaking off the flashback, he kept searching and came up with a shipping blanket and a pair of coveralls. After covering her with the blanket, he left the clothes next to her, then went to get a look outside. There were a lot of zombies, but most of them were outside the gates. If he was careful and stayed out of sight, he could probably use them to pick up the gang's trail. When they took off running, a good chunk of the horde followed them. With any luck, the dead pinned them in somewhere, and he'd be able to find them fast. Time was ticking. There was no telling what was happening to Cindy. He needed to get this done so he could find her. Mentally preparing himself for what he was about to do, Jerry closed his eyes for a second and took a deep breath. Once he was focused, he nodded to himself, then went to check on the woman one last time. When he got back to the dock, she somehow managed to drag herself over to the bodies and get a gun. Aiming it at him, she winced and asked,
Where is he?
Her hands were shaky, and her eyes were slightly glazed over. Jerry knew she might pull the trigger if he moved too fast.
Take it easy. I don't know what you're talking about. Who's he?
Blinking rapidly and adjusting her aim, she barked.
Where is he?
Trying to stay calm, Jerry spoke slowly and kept his hands where she could see them.
I don't know, but if you put the gun down, I'll try to help you out.
Reluctantly lowering the gun, she winced again and let out a groan as she tried to sit up.
Okay then. When I got here, I saw a truck speeding out. There were a bunch of people in it. Maybe whoever you're looking for is with them. I'm leaving. I've bandaged you up and left you something to put on. You're pretty banged up. My advice? You should stay put for a while. The dead are everywhere. You won't make it off the block in your condition. I'm just saying, it's your life. Do what you want. But I'm out. Good luck.
With that, he gave her a friendly nod, then turned to leave, but she stopped him.
Were they teenagers?
In the truck? I don't know. Maybe. They were moving fast. I didn't get a good look.
She nodded and put her head down. Jerry could tell the lady needed help, but he had his own problems.
Look, I gotta go, but I'll come by here on my way back. If you're still here, I'll do what I can to get you on the road. I'm Jerry. What's your name again?
Beth. And my son's name is Andrew. That's who I'm looking for.
All right, Beth, sit tight. There's plenty of food in here, and I saw a water cooler in the break room. You should be okay for a while. I'll be back.
She thanked him for bandaging her up, and he hit the road. Getting away from the warehouse turned out to be a lot harder than it should have been. From the moment Jerry snuck through the rear entrance, there were problems. First, he had to put down a pair of crawlers that had been lurking behind the building. After that, following the zombie trail led him through a pocket of survivors that were dropping cinder blocks off the rooftops to kill zombies. The problem was, they didn't discriminate. Anyone around those buildings were getting bombed. Once he managed to avoid getting squashed, he encountered the single worst thing he'd seen since all of this had started. While weaving his way through a maze of abandoned cars, Jerry came face to face with a bloated zombie. It looked like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and when Jerry hit it with his bat, the fucking thing popped. It made a wet clap sound, splattering guts and black blood on everything, including Jerry. The smell made his eyes and lungs burn while he slipped in the ooze around his feet. When they finally did get clear of it, things went from bad to worse. Apparently, the odor worked as an attractant. The next thing he knew, there were a pack of drooling ghouls chasing him. There was no point in being quiet anymore. As soon as he'd put some distance between him and the pursuers, Jerry thumbed the safety off his M4, then turned and opened fire. He made quick work of them, but between the noise and his new perfume, he was attracting all sorts of attention. Before he knew it, he dropped half a dozen, and there were more coming. Street for street, block for block, the dead were flocking to him, and he was running out of steam. Call it luck or divine intervention. Ahead of him, he saw 3 men wearing cuts, waving him into a bank. It was them. He'd found the gang. Pushing himself to the limit, he raced inside and collapsed as they slammed the door shut behind him. He laid there sucking wind, trying to get himself together as the 3 men turned their guns on him. The closest one, a slim guy with bad teeth and a face full of tattoos, grumbled.
Fuck me, he stinks. Smells like one of them geeks out there.
Another of them, a muscular man with a shaved bald head, asked,
You ain't bit, are you?
Sitting up, Jerry shook his head.
Nah, I'm good. Damn, I'm glad you fellas were here. Don't think I could have kept that up.
The fuck were you doing out there? We heard you coming from a mile away.
The third guy asked. Unlike the other two, he was on the chubby side and was noticeably shorter than them. Getting to his feet, Jerry took a look around and didn't see the rest of the gang.
I was looking for a woman. Did you guys see anyone out there?
The slim guy laughed.
Hell, brother, ain't we all? You looking for any woman? Or do you have a specific one in mind?
Since Jerry had never actually seen Cindy, there was no way for him to describe her. The only thing he could do was try to bluff his way through this.
Her name's Cindy. She's in her 20s. Probably would have been traveling alone.
The guy seemed to get a good laugh out of that. While it wasn't the response he was hoping for, his question got them to let their guards down. There wouldn't be a better time. Before any of them realized what was happening, Jerry brought his gun up and shot the bald guy in the face. Turning his attention to the other two, he aimed low and shot them both in the legs. With the two of them screaming and zombies pounding at the door, Jerry set his rifle down and pulled his bat from his pack.
Okay, fellas, I'm gonna make this quick. A day or so ago, you guys cleaned out a building near Quickstand. You took a shitload of supplies, but most importantly, you took the girl. Where is she?
The short guy spoke up first.
Fuck you! I'm gonna tear your fucking head off, you piece of...
There was a loud thwack from the impact of the bat obliterating his skull, splattering his brains across his buddy's face. Skinny, the last man standing, so to speak, instantly started babbling.
Shit, look, man. I wasn't on that run. Bobby and some of the other boys did that one. They're going to Lake St. Clair to meet up with Skinny Pete. I swear, man, it wasn't me.
Thinking about it for a moment, Jerry looked at the bodies, then nodded and smiled.
You know what? I believe you. Thanks for being honest.
With that said, he clutched the bat, then looked Skinny in the eyes and bashed his head in. Once he cleaned himself up, Jerry swapped shirts with the chubby guy and took the pants from the musclehead, and he got moving. The smell was still on him, thanks to his armor, but it wasn't as bad now. As long as he kept his distance, the dead didn't notice him. It took the rest of the day to get to the lake, but by nightfall, he was setting up camp on the roof of a Starbucks. He was starting to regret not asking more questions. If he was smarter, he would have asked where they were meeting. From where he was sitting, there was a good view of the lake. He scanned the area looking for signs, but with no lights, all he could make out were shapes. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and he drifted off, but his rest didn't last long. Sunrise kicked off with gunfire. Startled out of his sleep, Jerry popped up and was shocked to see a boat docked near the City Hall building. The shots were clearly coming from there, but he couldn't see who was doing the shooting. He watched for a while till he saw a man wearing cuts sneaking around the building. Grabbing his gear, Jerry used the access ladder to climb down, then rushed to get closer. When he finally got a good look at what was going on, he was confused. There was an older guy and a woman shooting it out with the gang. They were both using AR-15s and wearing tactical gear. Whoever these two were, they meant business. As always, the noise of the shootout was attracting attention. Zombies were starting to swarm towards the commotion. Knowing he was running out of time, Jerry got in the fight. Since no one knew he was there, it was easy to sneak up behind the men he'd seen and take them out. He killed one and wounded the other. He needed at least one of them alive. After that, he moved in and found himself taking fire from the building as he approached. Luckily, the distraction gave the old man and his partner the chance they needed. The two of them stormed the building, and a short while later, the shooting stopped. Jerry held his position till he saw the old man and woman come racing out of the building. They both let off shots in the direction of the boat. It wasn't until then that Jerry saw one of the bikers on board it. They tried their best to stop him, but they couldn't. The two of them watched as he pulled away in what Jerry guessed was their boat. Feeling as though the battle was over, Jerry approached with caution till the duo spotted him. Considering the situation, he wasn't surprised that they came in hot. Guns up, barking orders, they stripped him of his weapons, then patted him down. Once they were sure he wasn't a threat, the old man extended a hand.
The name's Walter. That's Paula.
He pointed to his partner, then to the group of 3 people Jerry hadn't noticed.
That's my son Daniel, Virginia, and Holly. I saw you backing us up. Thanks for the help.
Jerry nodded, then glanced back at the approaching zombies.
That's great and all, but can we do this inside? I don't want to be out here when the welcome wagon arrives.
Nodding in agreement, Walter motioned to Paula. Then the 3 of them hurried over to the others and got inside.